Clara Vance pressed her palm against the parlor door, every word from inside cutting deeper than the last. Her own mother, voice bright with relief, calling her departure a miracle. Her sisters giggling about having more room, more suitors, more everything now that the difficult one would finally be gone. Rhett Calder, the mountain rancher everyone whispered about, had asked for her hand. Not beautiful Rosalind, not charming Emmeline, her, and they couldn't wait to be rid of her. When Rhett's shadow filled the doorway an hour later, Clara made her choice. Not because she wanted him, but because staying would kill something in her she wasn't ready to lose. Welcome to a story about a woman who refused to disappear. If you're watching from somewhere in this world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button. Now, let's see what happens when the unwanted daughter walks away. The November wind carried the smell of wood smoke and coming snow through the gaps in the window frame. Clara stood motionless in the upstairs hallway of the Vance house, her fingertips barely touching the painted door that separated her from the parlor below. She shouldn't be listening, she knew that. But something had pulled her back from her room, some instinct that whispered, "Wait, hear this, you need to know." "Honestly, Catherine, you must be relieved." That was Mrs. Holloway from town, her voice sugary with false sympathy. "A girl like Clara, well, she's been difficult to place, hasn't she?" Clara's mother laughed. Actually laughed. "You have no idea. I've prayed for this day. Rhett Calder may be strange, living up in those mountains like some kind of hermit, but he's wealthy, and he asked for her. I nearly wept with gratitude." "Does Clara know yet?" "She will soon enough. Rhett's coming this afternoon to formalize things." Her mother's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, but Clara could still hear every word. "Between us, I don't care if he keeps her locked in a tower. At least she'll be someone else's problem." The floorboard beneath Clara's foot creaked. She froze, but the conversation below continued without pause. They hadn't heard. Or maybe they just didn't care. "What about Rosalind?" Mrs. Holloway asked. "I thought for certain he'd choose her. She's so lovely, and Rosalind deserves better than a recluse." That was Emmeline, Clara's younger sister, her voice pitched high with indignation. "Can have him. She's not suited for proper society anyway. Remember the Hendersons' dinner party? She actually contradicted Mr. Henderson about his own business dealings. I wanted to die of shame." "She was probably right, though," Mrs. Holloway said with a small laugh. "Henderson lost a fortune on that railroad investment, didn't he?" "That's not the point." Emmeline's tone sharpened. "A woman doesn't humiliate a man at his own table, correct or not. Clara has no sense of how things work." Clara's hand fell away from the door. She stepped back, then back again, until her shoulders met the wall. The voices continued, discussing her future, her flaws, her fundamental wrongness. But she'd stopped listening. Something had shifted inside her chest, something cold and final. She'd always known they didn't love her. That wasn't news. But hearing them celebrate her removal, hearing the relief in her mother's voice, the casual cruelty in Emmeline's, that was different. That was permission. Clara turned and walked down the hallway to her room. She didn't slam the door. She closed it quietly, carefully, the way she'd learned to do everything in this house. Small, unobtrusive, forgettable. The room was spare. A narrow bed, a washstand, a wardrobe that held 3 dresses and 2 work skirts. While Rosalind and Emmeline's rooms overflowed with ribbons and lace and gifts from admirers, Clara's space looked almost monastic. She preferred it that way. Fewer things meant fewer expectations. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. They were rough for a lady's hands, calloused from the garden work she did because the staff was always too busy with her sister's needs, scarred from the time she'd helped their stableman with a difficult foaling because no one else would. Her mother had been furious about those scars. "No man wants damaged goods," she'd said. Apparently Rhett Calder didn't mind. Clara had seen him exactly twice. Once at the general store in town, standing near the back, Dark Hat pulled low, buying supplies in bulk like he was preparing for a siege. He'd glanced at her, just once, and she'd felt the weight of that look like a physical thing, assessing, measuring. Then he'd looked away and she'd forgotten about it. The second time was at church 3 months ago. He'd sat in the last pew alone and left before the final hymn. She remembered because Rosalind had whispered to Emmeline about how tragic it was that such a wealthy man had let himself go like that. Clara had turned to look and saw nothing tragic, just a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, same as her. Now he'd asked for her hand. She wondered if he knew what he was getting. Did her father tell him she was difficult? That she asked too many questions, read too many books, had opinions about things women shouldn't care about? Or did he just see an opportunity? A daughter her family wanted gone badly enough that they wouldn't ask too many questions about the arrangement. Clara stood and crossed to the window. From here she could see the front drive, the manicured lawn her father was so proud of, the iron gates that marked the boundary between their property and the rest of the world. Beyond that, hills rolled toward the mountains in shades of gray and brown, all the color bled out by the approaching winter. Somewhere up there was Rhett Calder's ranch. She tried to imagine it and couldn't. Her frame of reference was too narrow, polished parlors and social calls, and the suffocating weight of expectations she could never meet. What did a mountain ranch look like? What would she do there? Who would she be? A knock at her door scattered the thoughts. "Clara?" Her father's voice, gruff but not unkind. He'd never been cruel to her, just absent, disappointed. "Come down to the parlor, please. We have a guest." She didn't answer, but she heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. For a long moment, Clara stood perfectly still. Then she smoothed her skirt, checked her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, brown hair pulled back too severely, gray eyes that never sparkled the way Rosalind's did, a mouth too wide for beauty, and opened the door. The walk down the stairs felt eternal. The parlor doors stood open. Inside, her family had arranged themselves like a painting, her mother on the settee, her father by the fireplace, Rosalind and Emmeline perched on chairs positioned to display their best angles. And standing near the window, hat in his hands, was Rhett Calder. He looked exactly like she remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40 years old, with dark hair going gray at the temples and lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting into sun or wind. His clothes were clean but worn, practical ranch wear that seemed out of place among the velvet and brocade of the Vance parlor. He didn't look uncomfortable, exactly. Just separate. Like he existed in a different world that happened to overlap with this one for the moment. When Clara entered, everyone turned to look at her except Rhett. He kept his gaze on the window, on the mountains beyond. "Clara, there you are." Her father gestured her forward with forced joviality. "Mr. Calder has come to speak with you." "With me?" Clara kept her voice neutral. "I thought this was already decided." Her mother's smile went brittle. "Don't be difficult, dear." "I'm not being difficult. I'm asking a question." Rhett turned then, and his eyes met hers. They were gray, like hers, but darker. Storm cloud gray. He studied her face for a moment, and she had the strangest sense that he was looking for something specific. "Miss Vance," he said. His voice was deep, roughened by weather or disuse. "Your father and I have discussed an arrangement, but I wanted to hear from you before anything's finalized." The room went very quiet. Clara felt her mother's panic like static in the air. This wasn't how these things worked. The men decided, the women accepted. Giving her a voice in the matter was dangerous. She might use it. "What exactly is the arrangement?" Clara asked. Her father cleared his throat. "Mr. Calder has offered for your hand in marriage. It's a very generous—" "I can speak for myself," Rhett interrupted. Not rudely, just matter of fact. He looked back at Clara. "I need a wife. The ranch is too much for one person, and I'm not getting younger. Your father suggested you might be suited for the life. Hard work, isolation, no social calendar to speak of. Most women wouldn't want it. But you think I would. I think you might survive it. Not thrive, not enjoy. Survive." Clara almost smiled. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. "And what do I get in return?" she asked. Her mother made a small, horrified sound. Emmeline's eyes went wide. Rosalind looked like she might faint from secondhand embarrassment. But Rhett just tilted his head slightly, considering. "A home. Work that matters. No one questioning your worth every time you open your mouth." He paused. "And a choice. If you say no, I'll walk out that door and we'll forget this conversation happened. Your father seems to think you don't have options, but I'm giving you one right now." The room held its breath. Clara looked at her mother's desperate expression, her father's carefully neutral face, her sister's barely concealed relief at the prospect of her departure. Then she looked at Rhett Calder, this strange, blunt man who'd offered her the first genuine choice she'd ever been given. She thought about the conversation she'd overheard. Someone else's problem. Finally be rid of her. Something hardened in her chest, crystalline and cold. "I need to think about it," Clara said. "Clara!" Her mother's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't be absurd. Mr. Calder is offering you—" "I said I need to think about it." Clara kept her eyes on Rhett. "How long do I have?" "Take until morning," Rhett said. "I'll be staying at the hotel in town. Send word before noon tomorrow." He nodded to her father, ignored her mother entirely, and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Clara. "For what it's worth, Miss Vance, I don't think you're difficult. I think you're smart. And people tend to call smart women difficult when they don't know what else to do with them." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the polished floor, and Clara was left standing in a parlor full of people who looked at her like she'd just set the house on fire. "How dare you!" her mother hissed the moment the front door closed. "How dare you embarrass us like that? That man offered you a way out, a life, and you—" "I said I'd think about it." "There's nothing to think about." Her mother's face had gone red. "You're 23 years old, Clara. No prospects, no beauty, no charm. This is the only offer you're ever going to get, and if you throw it away because of your pride—" "It's not pride." Clara's voice came out quieter than she intended, but steady. I just want one night to think about it. One night that's mine before my whole life changes." Her father sighed. "Catherine, let the girl think. She'll come to the right conclusion." The right conclusion, meaning the one they wanted. Clara turned and walked out of the parlor. She heard her mother start to protest, heard Emmeline say something snide, but she kept walking, through the foyer, up the stairs, down the hall, into her room. This time she did close the door hard enough to make a statement. She sat on her bed and waited for the anger to come, or the fear, or something. Instead, she just felt numb. The hours crept by. Dinner happened without her. No one came to call her down, which told her everything she needed to know about how that conversation was going. She heard them talking, heard the clink of silverware, heard Rosalind's bright laughter at something their father said. As darkness fell, Clara lit her lamp and pulled out the one book she owned that her mother didn't know about, a worn copy of 2 Years Before the Mast that she'd found in a second-hand shop. She'd read it a dozen times, always drawn to the parts about choosing a hard life, because the alternative was suffocation. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hall, a soft knock. "Clara?" Rosalind's voice, uncertain. "Can I come in?" Clara almost said no, but curiosity won. "It's not locked." Rosalind slipped inside, closing the door behind her. She was wearing her dressing gown, her golden hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like a painting, even now, especially now. "I wanted to talk to you," Rosalind said. "Before you decide." "Did Mother send you?" "No." Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wrinkle anything. "I came because— Clara, I know we're not close. I know you think I'm frivolous, and I think you're—" She trailed off. "Difficult?" Rosalind winced. "I was going to say stubborn, but yes, difficult too." She folded her hands in her lap. "I just want you to understand what you'd be walking away from. If you refuse Mr. Calder, Father will be furious. Mother will make your life hell. And there won't be another offer. You'll be here forever, watching Emmeline and me marry and have children, getting older, getting more bitter. You think I'm not already bitter?" "I think it could get worse." Rosalind's voice softened. "Clara, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be honest. You don't fit here. You never have. But up on that mountain, with a man who doesn't care about social graces or proper behavior, maybe you'd fit there. Maybe you'd even be happy." Clara studied her sister's face. "Why do you care if I'm happy?" "Because you're my sister." Rosalind stood, smoothing her dressing gown. "And because I'm not as shallow as you think I am. I see things, Clara. I see how Mother treats you, how Father dismisses everything you say, how Emmeline mocks you behind your back." She moved toward the door, then paused. "You deserve better than this house. Even if better means living in the middle of nowhere with a strange man, at least it would be yours. She left before Clara could respond. Clara sat in the lamplight, turning Rosalind's words over in her mind. At least it would be yours. The truth was, she'd already made her decision. She'd made it the moment she heard her mother laughing about being rid of her, the moment Emmeline had called her unsuited for proper society, the moment Rhett Calder had looked at her and said, "I think you're smart." She was leaving. Not because she wanted to marry Rhett Calder. She didn't know him well enough to want anything involving him. But because staying in this house, in this family, in this life, would kill something essential in her. Some spark that hadn't quite gone out yet, but was getting dimmer every day. If she stayed, she'd become exactly what they already thought she was. Bitter, difficult, small. If she left, well, she didn't know what she'd become. But at least she'd find out. Clara blew out the lamp and lay down in the darkness. Tomorrow, she'd tell them. Tomorrow, she'd walk out of this house and not look back. Tomorrow, she'd choose herself, for the first time in her life. Morning came cold and bright. Clara woke before dawn, dressed in her plainest dress, and braided her hair with steady hands. She felt calm, eerily calm, like the stillness before a storm breaks. Downstairs, the house was just waking up. She could hear the cook starting breakfast, hear her father's heavy tread in his study. She wrote a note in careful script. "Mr. Calder, my answer is yes. I'll be ready by noon. CV." She gave it to the stable boy to deliver, pressed a coin into his palm to ensure he actually went, and returned to her room to pack. She didn't own much. That made it easier. One trunk, clothes, a few books, the seed packets she'd been saving from the garden. Her mother's garnet necklace, the only thing of value she'd ever been given, left on the dresser. She didn't want it. Didn't want anything from them. When she came down to breakfast, the family was already seated. Her mother took one look at her traveling dress and trunk and went pale. "You didn't." "I did," Clara said quietly. "I sent word to Mr. Calder this morning. I'll be leaving at noon." Her father set down his coffee. "Well, that's settled then." Her mother looked like she might cry, not from sadness, Clara realized, but from relief. The problem was solving itself. "I suppose we should discuss the arrangements. The wedding will need to be—" "We'll handle it ourselves," Clara interrupted. "You don't need to do anything." "Clara, be reasonable. There are proprieties." "I'm done being reasonable." Clara poured herself coffee with a steady hand. "I'm done with proprieties. I'm leaving at noon, and whatever happens after that is between Mr. Calder and me. You're all finally getting what you wanted. I'd think you'd be more grateful." The silence that followed was arctic. Emmeline broke it with a nervous laugh. "Well, at least you're finally showing some sense. Mountain life will probably suit you better anyway. All that fresh air and hard work, no need to worry about—" "Emmeline." Clara's voice was soft, but something in it made her sister stop mid-sentence. "I'm going to give you some advice. Stop talking about things you don't understand. It makes you sound stupid, and you're not stupid. You're just mean." Emmeline's mouth fell open. Clara finished her coffee, set the cup down precisely in its saucer, and stood. "Thank you for breakfast. I'll be in my room until Mr. Calder arrives." She walked out without waiting for permission. The next few hours passed in a strange, detached haze. Clara sat by her window, watching the road, feeling nothing. Not fear, not excitement, not regret. Just a vast, empty quiet, like the moment after a fever breaks. At 11:45, she saw the wagon coming up the drive. It wasn't fancy, just a sturdy ranch wagon pulled by two large draft horses, the bed loaded with supplies. Rhett was driving, his hat pulled low against the sun. He pulled up to the front door and climbed down, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had taken a lot of punishment over the years. Clara picked up her trunk, not heavy, but awkward, and carried it down the stairs herself. Her family had assembled in the foyer like mourners at a funeral. Her mother dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Her father looked uncomfortable. Rosalind watched with something that might have been concern. Emmeline just looked relieved. Rhett met Clara at the door. He took the trunk from her without asking, lifted it like it weighed nothing, and secured it in the wagon bed. "You have everything?" he asked. "Yes." "Then we should go. It's a long ride." Clara turned back to her family. She searched for something to say. Some parting words that would matter, that would mark this moment as significant. But looking at their faces, she realized there was nothing to say. These people had made their feelings clear. She owed them nothing, not even goodbye. "Thank you for raising me," she said finally, the words formal and empty. "I hope you're all very happy." Her mother stepped forward. "Clara, I know you think we're terrible, but we did our best." "I'm sure you did." Clara kept her voice neutral. "Goodbye, Mother." She didn't wait for a response. She walked to the wagon, accepted Rhett's hand to climb up to the seat, and settled herself on the worn leather cushion. Rhett climbed up beside her, gathered the reins, and clicked to the horses. The wagon rolled forward. Clara looked straight ahead as they passed through the iron gates. She didn't look back at the house, at her family, at the only life she'd ever known. She just watched the road ahead as it curved toward the mountains. They'd been riding for maybe 10 minutes when Rhett spoke. "You all right?" Clara considered the question. Was she all right? She'd just left her entire family, agreed to marry a stranger, and was heading into a life she couldn't begin to imagine. By any reasonable measure, she should be terrified. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Ask me again in a week." Rhett's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. They rode in silence for a while. The road climbed gradually, leaving the valley behind. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying the scent of pine and stone. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and watched the landscape change, cultivated fields giving way to wild grass, then to forest, then to open rangeland that stretched toward peaks still capped with snow despite the late season. "How far is the ranch?" she asked eventually. "Another 4 hours. We'll get there before dark." 4 hours. Clara settled in, feeling the rhythm of the wagon, the steady plod of the horses. She'd expected awkwardness, forced conversation, the painful dance of two strangers trying to figure each other out. But Rhett didn't seem interested in any of that. He just drove, occasionally adjusting the reins, his attention on the road and the mountains beyond. It should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it was almost peaceful. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses. Rhett pulled off the road into a small clearing with a creek running through it. He unhitched the horses to let them drink and handed Clara a canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Bread and cheese," he said. "Nothing fancy." Clara unwrapped it and found thick slices of brown bread and a wedge of sharp yellow cheese. She ate standing up, watching the water tumble over rocks, feeling the sun on her face. It was the first meal she'd eaten in years without someone criticizing her posture or her appetite or the way she held her fork. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Rhett was checking the wagon's axle, but he glanced up. "Go ahead." "Why me? You could have had Rosalind. She's beautiful, charming, everything a man's supposed to want in a wife." Rhett straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "You want the truth?" "Always. I met your sister once at some town function I got dragged to. She talked for 20 minutes straight without saying a single thing that meant anything. Just noise. Pretty noise, but noise." He picked up the canteen, took a drink. "Then I saw you at the general store arguing with the clerk about whether he'd shortchanged the old widow who'd come in before you. You made him recount the till, found the error, made sure she got her money. Then you left without asking for credit or thanks." Clara remembered that day. Mrs. Patterson, half blind and trusting, accepting whatever the clerk told her. The righteous anger that had made Clara speak up even though she knew it would mark her as difficult. "You needed a wife who'd stand up for what's right," she said slowly. "Not one who'd look pretty at parties. I needed a partner, someone who wouldn't break the first time things got hard." Rhett's gray eyes met hers. "The ranch isn't easy, Miss Vance. The work is brutal, the isolation is real, and there's no one to perform for. You either pull your weight or you don't. Your sister would last maybe a week before she'd be begging to go back to town. And you think I won't? I think you're tougher than you look. I think you've been surviving in a place that didn't want you for years, and you're still standing. That's the kind of strength I need." He moved to rehitch the horses. "Plus, you didn't simper or bat your eyes or pretend to be something you're not when I came calling. You asked what you'd get out of the deal. That told me you understand how the world actually works." Clara absorbed this. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly kind. But it was honest, and she valued that more than pretty lies. "I should tell you," she said, "I've never run a ranch. I don't know anything about cattle or horses or any of it. I might be terrible at this." "Then you'll learn." Rhett offered her a hand back up to the wagon seat. I'm not expecting perfection, Miss Vance. I'm expecting effort. Can you give me that? Clara thought about her choices. She could admit defeat before she'd even started, protect herself from the possibility of failure. Or she could do what she'd always done, push forward despite the certainty that she'd be judged, criticized, found wanting. Except this time, the judgment might actually be fair, based on her actions, not her inability to be someone she wasn't. I can give you effort, she said. I can promise you that much. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go. They climbed back into the wagon and continued up the mountain. The afternoon light turned golden, then amber, then the deep blue-gray of approaching evening. The road grew rougher, little more than 2 tracks through increasingly wild country. Clara saw elk in the distance, a hawk circling overhead, pine trees so tall they seemed to scrape the sky. And finally, as the sun touched the western peaks, the ranch came into view. It wasn't what she'd expected. Not that she'd known what to expect exactly, but she'd imagined something more structured. What she saw instead was a collection of buildings that looked like they'd grown organically from the landscape. A main house built of logs and stone, a large barn, several outbuildings, corrals that blended into the natural meadow. Everything weathered, functional, honest. Home, Rhett said simply. He drove the wagon past the barn toward the house. As they approached, Clara saw a man emerge from one of the outbuildings, older, lean, moving with the bow-legged gait of someone who'd spent a lifetime on horseback. He raised a hand in greeting. That's Dutch, Rhett said. Foreman. He'll probably test you to see if you're worth keeping around. Don't let him rattle you. Is he the only hand? No, there's 4 others. They bunk in the building past the barn. You'll meet them at dinner. The wagon stopped in front of the house. Rhett set the brake and climbed down, then reached up to help Clara. His hands were calloused, strong, impersonal. He released her the moment her feet touched ground. The front door of the house opened and a woman emerged, maybe 60, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a practical dress and an appraising expression that could have cut glass. Mrs. Gable, Rhett said. This is Clara Vance. She'll be staying. Clara, Mrs. Gable keeps the house and cooks. She doesn't put up with nonsense. Neither do I, Mrs. Gable said, looking Clara up and down. Can you cook? Some, Clara said. Can you clean? Yes. Can you shoot? Clara blinked. A gun? No. Harsh words. Mrs. Gable's expression didn't change. Yes, a gun. We're 20 miles from town and the nearest neighbor is an hour's ride. If something needs shooting, you need to be able to do it. I've never fired a gun, Clara admitted, but I can learn. Mrs. Gable studied her for another long moment, then gave a sharp nod. At least you're honest. Better than the last girl Rhett brought up here. She headed back into the house. Bring her things inside. I'll show her where she's sleeping. Last girl? Clara asked quietly as Rhett lifted her trunk. Didn't work out, was all he said. The inside of the house was as practical as the outside. Large main room with a stone fireplace, kitchen area along one wall, a hallway leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean but spare, built for function rather than comfort. There were no curtains, no decorative touches, nothing soft or frivolous. Clara felt something in her chest ease. She could work with this. Mrs. Gable led her down the hall to a small bedroom. It held a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. That was all. This is yours, Mrs. Gable said. Rhett's room is at the end of the hall. He doesn't bother anyone and expects the same courtesy. Dinner's at 6. We eat together, me, Rhett, and whoever's not out on range. You're expected to help serve and clean up after. She paused at the door. One more thing. Up here, we work. We don't make excuses, we don't complain, and we don't quit when things get hard. If you can't handle that, speak up now before you waste everyone's time. Clara set her bag on the bed. I can handle it. We'll see. Mrs. Gable left, closing the door behind her. Clara stood alone in the small room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. From outside came the low sounds of cattle, the whinny of a horse, men's voices calling to each other. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of purple and gold. She unpacked her trunk slowly, putting her few possessions in the dresser, hanging her dresses in the narrow closet. When everything was arranged, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd done. She'd left. Actually left. Walked away from her family, her home, everything familiar. Agreed to marry a man she barely knew. Committed to a life she couldn't begin to understand. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and uncertainty, was a small, fierce spark of something that felt almost like joy. Because for the first time in 23 years, she'd made a choice that was entirely her own. A bell rang from the main room. Dinner, she assumed. Clara stood, smoothed her skirt, and took a breath. Then she opened the door and walked out to meet whatever came next. The men were already gathering when she entered the main room. Dutch, the foreman, and 3 younger hands, all of them stopping mid-conversation to stare at her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. "Gentlemen," Rhett said from his position near the head of the long wooden table, "this is Miss Clara Vance. She'll be staying on. I expect you to treat her with respect and teach her what she needs to know. Clara, this is Dutch, Tom, Sam, and young Jack." The men nodded, mumbled greetings. Clara nodded back, meeting each man's eyes in turn. She could feel them measuring her, wondering if she'd last a week, or a month, or at all. Mrs. Gable brought out platters of food, roasted meat, potatoes, thick slices of bread. The men ate like they'd been starving, conversation sparse and practical. Clara served herself and ate quietly, listening to them discuss cattle movements, fence repairs, the weather forecast. No one asked her opinion. No one expected her to make polite conversation or fill awkward silences. She was just there, part of the landscape, like the furniture. It should have felt diminishing. Instead, it felt like relief. After dinner, she helped Mrs. Gable clear the dishes while the men lingered over coffee, still talking about the next day's work. Mrs. Gable washed, Clara dried, and the older woman kept up a running commentary about the ranch, what grew where, which animals needed watching, how the seasons changed things up here. "You'll start learning tomorrow," Mrs. Gable said, scrubbing a pot with fierce efficiency. "Rhett will want to see what you're made of. He's fair, but he doesn't carry anyone. You pull your weight, or you're useless. Simple as that." "I understand," Clara said. "Do you?" Mrs. Gable paused, hands in the dishwater, and looked at her directly. "This isn't town, girl. This isn't playing at country life while servants do the real work. Up here, if you don't work, you don't eat. If you can't handle your share, everyone else has to pick up slack. And these men don't have patience for dead weight. Then I'll make sure I'm not dead weight." Mrs. Gable studied her face, then gave a small grunt that might have been approval. "We'll see. Talk is easy. Doing is something else." Later, alone in her small room with the window open to the mountain air, Clara lay in the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling. She should have been afraid. She should have been questioning every decision that led her to this moment. But all she felt was the spark getting brighter. Tomorrow, they'd test her. They'd push her to see where she broke, and she'd show them the same thing she'd been showing people her whole life. That she was tougher than she looked, stronger than they expected, and too stubborn to quit just because something was hard. The difference was that here, for the first time, those qualities might actually matter. Clara closed her eyes and made herself a promise in the darkness. She would never be small again. Never make herself less to make someone else comfortable. Never apologize for taking up space or having opinions or being difficult. Up here on this mountain, she would find out who she really was when no one was trying to reshape her into something more acceptable. And whatever that turned out to be, it would be hers. Completely, finally, impossibly hers. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow and possibility. Clara pulled the rough blanket up to her chin and let herself smile. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, she'd sleep as a woman who'd chosen herself. And that was enough. Dawn came too early and too cold. Clara woke to the sound of boots on wooden floors, low voices, the clang of the stove being stoked in the main room. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back in a rush. The ranch, the mountain, the choice she'd made. She dressed quickly in the half-light, her fingers clumsy with cold as she buttoned her plainest work dress. Through the window, she could see the sky just beginning to lighten, stars still visible above the peaks. The men were already moving outside, shadows against the gray dawn, heading toward the barn. When Clara emerged from her room, Mrs. Gable was in the kitchen, working with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd done this exact routine 1,000 times before. "Coffee's on the stove," Mrs. Gable said. without looking up from the biscuit dough she was kneading. Pour yourself a cup, then get over here. I need those eggs beaten and that bacon started. No good morning, no asking if she'd slept well, just straight to work. Clara poured coffee into a tin cup, took one scalding sip, and set it aside to help. Mrs. Gable handed her a bowl of eggs and a whisk, nodding toward the stove. 12 eggs, beaten smooth, bacon in the pan, medium heat, don't let it burn. When the men come in, they'll be hungry as wolves and twice as mean if the food isn't ready. Clara cracked eggs, whisked until her arm ached, managed the bacon without burning it, though grease spattered her dress. The biscuits went into the oven, potatoes got fried in the bacon fat, and by the time the men tramped in through the door, the table was loaded with enough food to feed an army. They ate fast and without much talk. Rhett sat at the head of the table, reading some kind of ledger while he chewed. Dutch shoveled food like he was in a race. The younger hands, Tom, Sam, and young Jack, ate with the single-minded focus of men who knew this might be their last meal until sundown. Clara ate standing up, too aware of being watched to sit. Mrs. Gable caught her eye and jerked her head toward the empty chair. Sit. You'll need the energy. What am I doing today? Clara asked, settling into the chair. Rhett looked up from his ledger. Dutch is taking you out to check the north pasture fence line. You'll walk it, mark what needs repair, help with the easy fixes. It's about 8 miles total. 8 miles. Clara kept her face neutral. All right. Can you ride? Dutch asked around a mouthful of biscuit. I've ridden before. That's not what I asked. Can you handle a horse on mountain terrain for 4 hours without falling off or spooking the animal? Clara met his skeptical gaze. I guess we'll find out. Dutch made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort. Fair enough. Meet me at the barn in 20 minutes. Wear something you don't mind ruining. After breakfast, Clara changed into her oldest skirt and a work shirt she'd brought, thinking it might be useful for gardening. She tied her hair back tight, put on the sturdiest boots she owned, and headed to the barn. Dutch was already there, saddling 2 horses, a big roan gelding for himself and a smaller bay mare for Clara. He eyed her outfit with something like approval. That'll do. This here's Maple. She's steady, won't bolt on you, but she's stubborn as hell. You let her know you mean business, or she'll try to take you back to the barn the whole ride. Clara approached the mare slowly, let her sniff her hand. The horse's eyes were intelligent, measuring. Hello, Maple. Don't sweet-talk her, Dutch said. She don't care about pretty words. Just show her you can sit a saddle without flopping around like a sack of grain. He gave Clara a leg up. She settled into the saddle, found the stirrups, took the reins. The mare shifted under her, testing, and Clara tightened her knees and sat deeper. Maple settled. Huh, Dutch said. Maybe you won't die. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, flooding the valley with hard yellow light. The morning was crisp, sharp enough to make Clara's eyes water. Dutch set a steady pace and didn't try to make conversation, which suited her fine. She focused on staying balanced, on reading the mare's movements, on not looking as uncertain as she felt. The north pasture stretched for what seemed like miles. Rolling grassland dotted with cattle, bounded by a fence line that wound through rocks and trees and steep hillsides. Dutch pulled up at the first section and dismounted. We check every post, every wire. Anything loose or broken gets marked. You carry the paint, I'll do the inspecting. Stay close and keep up. For the next 3 hours, they walked the fence line. Dutch moved fast, his experienced eye catching things Clara wouldn't have noticed. A staple pulling loose, a wire starting to rust, a post that had shifted in the ground. Every time he found something, he'd grunt and say, "Mark it," and Clara would slash a red X on the post with the paintbrush. By mid-morning, her legs were burning from the uneven terrain, and her hands were cramped from gripping the brush. They'd marked maybe 40 problems and hadn't even covered half the fence. How often do you do this? Clara asked during a brief water break. Every section gets checked twice a year minimum, more if we've had bad weather. Dutch took a long drink from his canteen, studying her. You holding up? I'm fine. You look ready to keel over. I said I'm fine. Dutch's mouth twitched. Stubborn. Good. You'll need that. He recapped the canteen. But don't be stupid about it. If you need to rest, say so. I'd rather lose 10 minutes now than have to carry you back when you collapse. They kept walking. The sun climbed higher, the day warmed, and Clara's initial nervousness gave way to a kind of meditative focus. Mark the fence. Move forward. Mark the fence. Move forward. Her whole world narrowed to that rhythm. Around noon, they stopped to eat. jerky and hard biscuits from Dutch's saddlebag, eaten sitting on rocks overlooking the valley. From here, Clara could see the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, the mountains rising beyond in layers of blue and purple. "It's beautiful," she said, and immediately regretted it. Too soft. Too much like something Rosalind would say. But Dutch just nodded. "It is. Hard to see it some days when you're freezing your ass off in a blizzard or pulling a calf in the mud. But yeah, it's beautiful." He brushed crumbs from his pants. "Your family know what kind of life you signed up for." "They don't care what kind of life I signed up for." "That why you left?" Clara looked at him. His weathered face showed only mild curiosity, no judgment. "Part of it." "And the other part?" "I was tired of being the problem when the real problem was that I didn't fit their idea of what I should be." Clara surprised herself with the honesty. "Up here, at least if I'm a problem, it'll be because I actually did something wrong, not because I existed incorrectly." Dutch considered this. Rhett's fair, tough, but fair. He won't ask you to be something you're not, but he will expect you to pull your weight, and the weight up here is real. He stood, dusting off his hands. "Ready to finish this?" "Ready." The afternoon was harder than the morning. Claire's boots had rubbed blisters on both heels, her shoulders ached from the constant climbing and scrambling, and the sun was merciless. But she kept pace with Dutch, marked every fence he pointed to, and didn't complain once. When they finally made it back to the horses as the sun dipped toward the western peaks, Dutch gave her an appraising look. "You did all right today." Coming from him, Clara suspected that was high praise. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow's going to be worse." They rode back to the ranch in the long golden light of late afternoon. Clara's legs trembled when she dismounted, but she forced herself to help Dutch unsaddle the horses, brush them down, check their hooves. By the time they were done, the dinner bell was ringing. The meal was the same as breakfast, efficient, functional, men too tired for much conversation. Clara ate mechanically, her body demanding fuel. Afterward, she helped Mrs. Gable with dishes again, barely registering the older woman's running commentary about the next day's menu planning. "You look half dead," Mrs. Gable observed as Clara dried the last pot. "I'm fine." "That's the second time today you've said that when it's clearly not true. You want to survive up here? You need to learn the difference between pushing through and breaking down." She hung up her dish towel with sharp precision. "Go soak those feet before you go to bed. Blisters will only get worse tomorrow." In her room, Clara peeled off her boots to find bloody spots on both heels where the leather had worn through her stockings. She filled the wash basin with cold water from the pitcher and soaked her feet, gritting her teeth against the sting. This was the price, she thought. This pain, this exhaustion, this constant testing. But it was honest pain, earned pain, not the slow erosion of being unwanted, the death by 1,000 small cruelties. This hurt, but it was clean. She bandaged her feet with strips torn from an old petticoat, put on her nightgown, and collapsed into bed. Sleep took her before she could even finish the thought she'd started. The next 6 weeks blurred together in a haze of work and weather and constant learning. Dutch took her out every day, sometimes to check fence, sometimes to move cattle, sometimes just to teach her how to read the land, how to spot trouble before it became crisis. She learned to notice when a cow was favoring a leg, when the grass was too sparse in a pasture, when clouds meant rain in an hour versus rain in 3 days. Mrs. Gable taught her the rhythm of the household, when to start bread so it would be ready for dinner, how to stretch supplies when the next town trip was still a week away, which herbs to gather before the first hard freeze. The older woman was exacting but not cruel, and Clara found herself soaking up information like she'd been starved for it. Rhett remained a quiet presence, more observer than participant in her education. He'd appear at unexpected moments, watching her struggle to saddle Maple, standing silent while she helped Dutch repair a broken gate, sitting across from her at dinner. He never offered help unless she asked, never criticized unless she made the same mistake twice. It should have felt cold, but Clara appreciated it. He was giving her space to fail, to learn, to prove herself without interference. The ranch hands warmed to her slowly. Tom was the first, a young hand barely 20 who missed his sisters and seemed to view Clara as a tolerable substitute. He started leaving her the easier tasks when they worked together, showing her shortcuts, warning her about which cattle had mean temperaments. Sam took longer, watching her with suspicious eyes until the day she helped him pull a calf that was breech. It was brutal, bloody work. Clara up to her elbows in the laboring cow, following Sam's terse instructions while the mother bellowed in pain. But when the calf finally came free and took its first shaking breath, Sam looked at Clara with something like respect. "You didn't faint," he said, like this was remarkable. "Why would I faint? Last woman up here took one look at a birthing and locked herself in the house for 2 days." Clara looked down at her ruined dress, her blood-covered hands. "I'm not the last woman." "No," Sam agreed. "I guess you're not." Young Jack was the hardest to win over. He was maybe 17, full of borrowed swagger, desperate to prove himself to the older men. He made pointed comments about Clara slowing them down, about having to do extra work because she didn't know what she was doing, about women not belonging on a working ranch. Clara ignored him for 3 weeks. Then one morning, when they were all gathered at breakfast, Jack made a crack about how Clara's cooking was almost edible for someone who probably had servants doing it her whole life. She set down her coffee cup very carefully. "You're right, Jack. I did grow up with servants. Know what I learned from watching them? That the people who do the real work are usually the ones who talk the least about it." She stood to clear her plate. "Maybe you should try that." Dutch choked on his biscuit. Tom covered his laugh with a cough. Even Rhett's mouth twitched. Jack went red, started to sputter something, but Dutch cut him off. "She's got a point, boy. You've been running your mouth about how much you can handle since you got here. Time to put more energy into working and less into talking." After that, Jack kept his comments to himself. He didn't become friendly exactly, but the hostility faded into grudging coexistence. The weather turned as October bled into November. The first snow came early one morning, just a dusting that melted by noon, but it was a warning. Winter was coming, and on the mountain that meant something different than it did in the valley. "We need to bring the cattle down from the high pastures," Rhett announced at dinner one night. "We'll start tomorrow. Work in 2 teams. Should take 3, maybe 4 days if the weather holds." Clara had been on cattle drives before, short ones, moving animals from one pasture to another. But this was different. This was gathering scattered herds from miles of mountain terrain and driving them down to the winter range near the ranch. "Clara rides with Dutch and Sam," Rhett continued. "Tom and Jack are with me. We'll meet at the South Range boundary and drive them in together." That night, Clara checked her gear, reinforced her worn boots with extra leather, waterproofed her coat with oil, packed supplies for days in the saddle. Mrs. Gable caught her in the kitchen filling a canteen. "You scared?" the older woman asked. "Should I be?" "Probably. It's hard work, long hours, and if something goes wrong up there, you're a long way from help." Mrs. Gable handed her a cloth-wrapped package. "Extra food, and this." She pressed a small knife into Clara's hand. "Keep it on you, just in case." "In case of what? Bears, cats? Men who might not have good intentions if they run across a woman alone." Mrs. Gable's expression was serious. "This isn't town, Clara. The rules are different up here. You protect yourself first. Worry about propriety. Never." Clara slipped the knife into her boot. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just come back alive." They rode out before dawn, Dutch, Sam, and Clara heading northeast while Rhett's team went northwest. The plan was to sweep the high country, gather the cattle, and drive them down in a controlled push. Simple in theory. Clara suspected it would be anything but simple in practice. She was right. The first day was a brutal lesson in mountain riding. They climbed trails Clara would have sworn were impassable, Maple somehow finding footing on slopes that seemed nearly vertical. Dutch rode ahead, reading signs Clara couldn't see. Tracks, droppings, broken branches that told him where the cattle had gone. Sam worked the flanks, and Clara did her best to follow instructions and not get killed. By midday, they'd found the first group, maybe 30 head scattered across a high meadow. Getting them moving was like herding particularly stupid, stubborn boulders. The cattle didn't want to leave the high grass, didn't want to bunch together, didn't want to go in the direction Dutch was pushing them. Clara learned the hard way that you couldn't just guide cattle. You had to convince them, outsmart them, sometimes just wait them out. "Stop chasing that cow," Dutch yelled at one point when Clara tried to head off a particularly determined heifer. "Let her think it's her idea, circle wide, give her room, she'll follow the others." Clara tried it. It worked. The heifer trotted back to the group like she'd never considered any other option. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, picketing the horses and keeping the gathered cattle close with a combination of positioning and sheer stubbornness. Sam built a fire while Dutch checked the herd count. Clara unsaddled Maple, rubbed her down, checked her hooves for stones. Dinner was jerky, hardtack, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. They ate in silence, too tired for conversation. Clara's entire body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. But when Sam offered to take first watch so she could sleep, she heard herself say, "I'll take a shift." "What time?" "Midnight to 2, Sam said. "Wake me when you're done." She slept hard for those few hours, curled in her bedroll near the fire. When Sam shook her awake at midnight, it took her a moment to remember where she was. Then the cold hit her and she was fully alert, wrapped in her coat, rifle across her lap like Sam had shown her. The mountain at night was a different world. Stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The soft sound of cattle shifting in the darkness. Somewhere distant, a wolf howled, and the cattle stirred uneasily. Clara kept the fire built up, stayed alert, and felt strangely alive in the cold darkness. When her watch ended, she woke Sam, crawled back into her bedroll, and slept dreamlessly until Dutch kicked her foot at dawn. The second day they found another 40 head, and the real work began. The cattle were spread across miles of broken country, hidden in ravines and copses, stubborn and wild from a summer of mountain freedom. Dutch sent Clara to push them out of the difficult spots, while he and Sam managed the gathering point. She spent hours scrambling through brush and over rocks, yelling herself hoarse, learning to read the cattle's moods and anticipate their moves. A big bull tried to charge Maple at one point, and Clara yanked the mare aside just in time, heart hammering. Dutch appeared out of nowhere, fired a shot in the air, and the bull thought better of his aggression. "Good instincts," Dutch said. "You're learning." By the third day, they'd gathered nearly 200 head and started the drive down to the winter range. This was the dangerous part, keeping the herd moving together, preventing stampedes, navigating the narrow trails that wound down the mountain. Clara rode drag position, eating dust and pushing stragglers, her whole world narrowed to the rhythm of the drive. They met Rhett's team at the boundary with another 150 head. Rhett pulled up beside Clara, his experienced eye taking in her appearance, filthy, exhausted, still in the saddle. "You make it through?" he asked. "Still here." "Good." He turned to address both teams. "Let's bring them home." The final push took the rest of the day. Nearly 400 cattle moving down the mountain in a river of bodies and noise and dust. Clara's voice was gone from yelling, her hands were raw from the reins, her legs had gone numb hours ago. But she stayed with it, pushed when Dutch signaled to push, held position when they needed to slow the pace, became just another working part of the machine that was the drive. When they finally funneled the herd into the winter pasture near the ranch, as the sun set behind the peaks, Clara felt something fierce and bright expand in her chest. They'd done it. She'd done it. Dutch rode up beside her as they watched the cattle settle. "You did good work, Clara. Real good work." She was too tired to speak. She just nodded. That night at dinner, the mood was different. The exhaustion was the same, but there was satisfaction underneath it, the bone-deep pleasure of hard work completed. Even young Jack didn't have anything snide to say, just ate his food and fell asleep at the table before dessert. "Leave him," Rhett said when Tom started to wake him. "He earned the rest." Clara caught Rhett's eye across the table. He raised his coffee cup slightly in acknowledgement. Not praise exactly, but recognition. She'd proven herself. Not once, but over and over, for weeks. And the proof was in the fact that no one questioned her right to be there anymore. She was part of the ranch now. Part of the crew. It should have felt like victory, but Clara was too tired to feel anything except the deep ache of muscles pushed to their limit. She helped Mrs. Gable with the dishes on autopilot, trudged to her room, and barely managed to pull off her boots before sleep took her. In the morning, the work continued. Because that was the nature of ranch life. There was always more work. Fence to repair from the list they'd made. Firewood to split and stack for winter. The barn roof needed patching before the heavy snows came. Tack to mend, tools to sharpen, 1,000 small tasks that kept the ranch running. Clara threw herself into all of it. She learned to split wood without hitting her own leg with the axe. She learned to patch a roof without falling off. She learned which cows were pregnant and which would need extra feed through the winter. She learned the difference between clouds that meant a dusting and clouds that meant 3 feet of snow. And slowly, without quite meaning to, she learned the rhythms of the people around her too. Dutch's dry humor that surfaced when he was pleased with something. Sam's quiet competence and the way he checked on the younger hands. Tom's homesickness that came out in stories about his family. Even young Jack's insecurity that drove his need to prove himself. Mrs. Gable became something like a friend, in her brusque way. They worked side by side in the kitchen, and the older woman shared stories about the ranch's history, about the hard winters and the lean years, about Rhett's father who'd built the place and the wife who'd died young. Rhett took it hard, Mrs. Gable said one evening while they kneaded bread. He was just a boy when she passed, 16. Had to become a man overnight, run this place with his father getting meaner by the year. She punched the dough with unnecessary force. Old man Calder blamed the ranch for killing her, like the land itself was responsible for a fever. Took it out on Rhett, worked him half to death. By the time the old bastard finally died, Rhett was so used to being alone he didn't know how to be anything else. Clara absorbed this, fitting it into her understanding of the quiet man who'd given her a choice when no one else would. Is that why he stays up here, away from town? Partly. Partly it's just who he is. Never did fit with the social nonsense, the politics, the way people in town need to know everyone's business. Mrs. Gable shaped her dough into loaves. He's a good man, Clara. Hard, but good. Don't mistake silence for coldness. I won't, Clara said. As November deepened, the first real snow came. Not a dusting, but a storm that dropped 2 feet overnight and shut down all outside work for 3 days. The crew was stuck in close quarters, and Clara discovered that being snowed in with 6 people was its own kind of test. But it was also when she saw a different side of ranch life. Sam had a harmonica and played surprisingly well. Tom told stories that had everyone laughing. Dutch taught her to play poker, using matchsticks for stakes, and didn't even complain too much when she won 3 hands in a row. Rhett mostly watched, occasionally contributing a dry comment that hit harder for its rarity. But Clara noticed he smiled more during those 3 days than she'd seen in the previous 2 months. Like the forced stillness of the storm had given him permission to stop working, stop managing, stop being the boss for a while. On the second night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Clara found herself alone with Rhett by the fire. She was mending a torn shirt. He was reading a book about cattle breeding. The silence between them was comfortable. "You've done well," Rhett said eventually, not looking up from his book. Clara set down her mending. "Thank you. I wasn't sure you would. City girl, no experience, leaving everything familiar." He turned a page. "Thought you might last a month, maybe 2, then asked to go back. Did you want me to fail?" "No." He looked at her then, his gray eyes serious. "I wanted you to succeed, but I've learned not to count on things I can't control." He closed the book. "You've surprised me, Clara. That doesn't happen often." "I've surprised myself," she admitted. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Rhett said, "There's something you should know about why I chose you." Clara waited. "Your father came to me first. Said he had 3 daughters, all marriageable. Any of them would be suitable. Brought your sisters to town, had them in their finest dresses, practically auctioned them off." Rhett's jaw tightened. "Made me sick, treating his own children like livestock." "That sounds like my father." I told him no. Told him I wasn't interested in some performance, some girl who'd been coached on how to act around a potential husband. Then I saw you in the store, doing what you thought was right without caring who it impressed. And I thought, there's someone real. Someone who might actually survive this life, because she's already surviving a different kind of hard. Clara felt something shift in her chest. "You chose me because I wasn't trying to be chosen. I chose you because you were the only one who seemed like a person instead of a product." He picked up his book again. "And I was right. You're going to do more than survive here, Clara. You're going to thrive." Before she could respond, he stood and headed to his room, leaving her alone by the dying fire. The next morning, the storm had passed and work resumed. But something had changed. Not in the work itself. That was still brutal, still demanding. But in Clara's relationship to it. She wasn't just enduring anymore. She was building something. A place, a purpose, a version of herself that fit this life instead of fighting it. 2 weeks later, a rider came up from town with supplies and news. Dutch met him at the barn, and Clara was close enough to hear their conversation. "Trouble brewing," the rider said. "Marcus Harding's been buying up land south of here. Got the Johnsons' place last week, the Morrison Ranch the week before. Word is he's got his eye on the water rights to Silver Creek." Dutch's expression darkened. "That creek runs through our land. That's why I thought Rhett should know. Harding's claiming the source is on public land, says he's got a right to divert it." The rider accepted coffee from Mrs. Gable. He's filing paperwork in town. Might want to get ahead of it. Clara found Rhett in the barn, told him what she'd heard. His face went carefully blank, which she'd learned meant he was furious. Harding, he said, the name like a curse. He's been trying to force me out for 5 years. Wants this land for his cattle empire. Doesn't care that it's been in my family for 30 years. What will you do? Go to town, fight the claim, show our deed, prove the water rights are ours. He started saddling his horse. It'll take a few days. Dutch will manage things here. Take me with you. Rhett stopped, looked at her. Why? Because Harding sounds like the kind of man who respects power, not paperwork. You show up alone, you're one rancher with a claim. You show up with support, with people standing behind you. That's different. Clara crossed her arms. Besides, I can read legal documents. I might actually be useful. Rhett studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, we leave in an hour. The ride to town took half a day. Rhett was quiet, his mind clearly on the coming confrontation. Clara used the time to think through what she knew about water rights, property claims, the legal structures that governed land use. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. The town looked different to Clara now. Smaller, somehow. Less significant. The buildings that had seemed so grand and important a few months ago just looked like buildings. The people she'd once been desperate to impress now seemed like strangers playing a game she no longer cared about. They went straight to the land office. The clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, pulled the relevant documents with shaking hands. Mr. Harding was here this morning, he said. Filed a claim for water diversion rights, citing the Homestead Act provisions for unclaimed water sources. The source isn't unclaimed, Rhett said flatly. It's on my land, has been for 30 years. Mr. Harding disputes that the source is within your property boundaries. Clara leaned over the document, scanning the legal language. Something caught her eye, a survey date, a boundary description that didn't match what she'd seen on the ranch maps. This survey is wrong, she said. The coordinates place the creek source half a mile west of where it actually is. The clerk blinked. I just file what's submitted, ma'am. Then you need to check it against the original land grant. Clara looked at Rhett. Do you have the original deed? At the ranch. Then we get it. We prove the survey is fraudulent or mistaken, and Harding's claim falls apart. The clerk looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Harding is a powerful man. He has lawyers, resources, and we have the truth, Clara said. That has to count for something. They left the land office and went to the hotel. Rhett got 2 rooms, separate, proper, Clara noted with something like amusement. Even out here, some proprieties held. That night at dinner in the hotel restaurant, Clara saw her mother across the room. Catherine Vance was with Rosalind and 2 other society women, all of them dressed in their finest, laughing at something one of them had said. Clara's mother looked happy, relaxed, unburdened. Clara waited for the hurt, the anger, the old familiar ache of not being enough. It didn't come. Instead, she just felt distant, like looking at characters in a play she'd once seen but no longer had any connection to. Her mother glanced over. Their eyes met, and Catherine's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, discomfort, something that might have been guilt. She started to rise, as if to come over, but Clara shook her head slightly. Just a small movement, but clear. Catherine sat back down and looked away. Was that your mother? Rhett asked quietly. Yes. Do you want to go talk to her? Clara cut into her steak. No, I really don't. They ate in silence. Across the room, Clara could feel her mother's gaze occasionally drifting their way, but she didn't acknowledge it. There was nothing to say. That life, that family, those expectations, they belonged to someone she used to be. After dinner, as they walked back through the town toward the hotel, Claire said, We need to be smart about this. Harding has money and influence. If we're going to beat him, we need to think like him. I'm listening. He's trying to claim the water sources on public land. That means he's either ignorant of the actual boundaries or he's deliberately lying. Either way, we prove him wrong with documentation. But we also need to make it clear that this isn't just about one water source, it's about the precedent. If he can steal your water rights, he can do it to every small rancher in the territory. Rhett stopped walking. You want to make this bigger than just my ranch. I want to make it too expensive for him to pursue. If it's just you versus him, he can wear you down with lawyers and delays. But if it's him versus every rancher who doesn't want to see their water rights stripped away, that's different. That's a fight that matters to people beyond us. A slow smile spread across Rhett's face. You're sneaky. I like that. I'm practical. I learned from my father. He was always talking about business strategy, leverage, playing the long game. I just never had a chance to actually use any of it. Clara started walking again. Tomorrow we get your deed, we verify the boundaries, and then we start talking to other ranchers. Build a coalition. Make Harding's grab look like what it is, a threat to everyone. That's going to take time. Good thing we have winter coming. Not much else to do while we're snowed in except plan. They reached the hotel. Rhett paused at the stairs leading up to the rooms. Clara? Yes? I'm glad you're here. Not just because you're useful, though you are, but because... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I've been alone up here for a long time. Alone even when there were people around. It's good to have someone who sees things the way you do, who thinks like a partner instead of an employee or an obligation. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. I'm glad I'm here too. They stood there for a moment in the quiet street, and Clara realized something that should have been obvious weeks ago. She was happy, actually genuinely happy, not performing happiness, not pretending at contentment, just happy. Tomorrow, Rhett said, we start fighting back. Tomorrow, Clara agreed, and as she climbed the stairs to her room, Clara found herself almost looking forward to the battle ahead. Because for the first time in her life, she was fighting for something that was truly hers, something worth protecting, something she'd built with her own hands and her own will and her own stubborn refusal to be less than she was capable of being. The girl who'd left her family's house months ago wouldn't have known how to fight this fight. But the woman she'd become? She was ready. They rode back to the ranch the next morning with the original land deed secured in Rhett's saddlebag, a yellowed document with boundary descriptions that put the lie to Harding's claim beyond any doubt. The creek source was well within Calder property, had been for 3 decades, and the survey Harding had submitted was either incompetent or deliberately falsified. Clara spent the ride thinking through their next moves, mentally cataloging every rancher within a day's ride who might have reason to fear Harding's expansion. The wind cut cold across the open country, carrying the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet but would soon. Winter was closing in fast. When they crested this final ridge and the ranch came into view below, Clara felt something catch in her chest. Home. She'd started thinking of it that way without even noticing the shift. Not the place she was staying, not the arrangement she'd agreed to. Home. Dutch met them at the barn, his face tight with worry. We got problems. Rhett dismounted fast. What kind? The kind with 2 legs and bad intentions. Found tracks this morning up by the north pasture. Boot prints, horse prints, signs someone's been watching the ranch. Fresh, maybe from last night. Dutch helped Clara down from her horse. Could be drifters, could be something else. But whoever it was, they were looking at our herd count and our security. Harding, Clara said. That'd be my guess, Dutch agreed. Man wants your land, he needs to know what he's up against. Sending scouts is the first step. Rhett's jaw tightened. Double the night watch. Nobody goes out alone. We keep the cattle close and the weapons closer. He looked at Clara. You still have that knife Mrs. Gable gave you? In my boot? Good. Keep it there. He turned back to Dutch. Get Tom and Sam. Have them ride the perimeter. I want to know if anyone else has been sniffing around. Over the next week, the tension ratcheted higher. Tom found evidence of a campsite in the hills overlooking the ranch, cold fire pit, horse droppings, but whoever had been there was long gone. Sam reported cattle being spooked in the night, like someone was testing their response time. And Clara herself saw a rider on the far ridge one afternoon, too distant to identify but clearly watching them. He's building a case, Clara said one night after dinner. The crew had gathered in the main room, ostensibly to play cards, but really to discuss strategy. Harding's documenting everything, herd size, staffing, weaknesses. When he makes his move, he'll know exactly where to hit. So we hit first, young Jack said. The boy had lost some of his swagger in recent weeks, replaced by actual competence. Ride down to his spread, make it clear we're not backing down. That's what he wants, Rhett said quietly. Gives him justification to escalate. We go down there making threats. Suddenly, We're the aggressors, and he's the victim defending his interests. Clara stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the dark mountains. We need to flip the script, stop defending and start attacking, not with fists, but with facts. We prove his survey is wrong, we get the other ranchers on our side, we make him look like what he is, a land grabber trying to steal what isn't his. Easier said than done, Dutch pointed out. Most ranchers around here don't want trouble with Harding. Man's got deep pockets and a long memory. Then we find the ones who've already been burned, Clara said, turning back to face the room. Harding didn't get this big by playing fair. There have to be people he's crushed on his way up, ranchers he's squeezed out or bought for pennies. We find them, we get their stories, we show everyone what happens when you let men like Harding take what they want. Sam looked at Rhett. She's got a point. I know she does. Rhett stood, moved to the map of the territory pinned to the wall. The Johnsons sold last month. The Morrisons the week before that. Both of them took losses. Both of them had no choice because Harding controlled their access to water or grazing land. He traced a finger along the map. If we can get them to talk, get them to document what Harding did, we build a pattern, Clara finished. Show it's not just us, it's a systematic campaign. That changes everything. It's also dangerous, Mrs. Gable said from her position by the stove. The older woman had been listening quietly, but her expression was grave. You start poking around in Harding's business, making his victims speak up, he's not going to sit idle. He'll come at you harder. He's already coming at us, Clara said. At least this way we're doing something about it. The decision made, they divided the work. Rhett would ride out to talk to the displaced ranchers, document their stories, build the case. Dutch and the hands would maintain the ranch and keep watch for trouble. And Clara would handle the legal research, prepare the documentation, and find any precedent that could strengthen their position. I'll go to town, she said. Talk to the land office clerk again, see what other claims Harding has filed. Check the county records for patterns. Not alone you won't, Rhett said. Tom goes with you. Clara started to argue, then saw the look on Rhett's face. This wasn't about whether she could handle herself. It was about not giving Harding an easy target. Fine. Tom and I leave tomorrow. That night, Clara lay awake in her room, listening to the house settle and the wind pick up outside. The stakes had changed. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. Wasn't just about escaping her old life. This was about protecting something real, something that mattered. The ranch, the people who worked it, the life they'd built in this hard country. She thought about her father, about the way he'd played business like a game of chess, always thinking 3 moves ahead. He'd been ruthless, calculating, willing to crush anyone who got in his way. She'd hated that about him, but now, facing someone cut from the same cloth, Clara realized she'd learned more from watching him than she'd ever admitted. The difference was she'd used those skills to protect instead of exploit, to defend instead of destroy. Morning came gray and cold. Clara and Tom rode out under a sky that promised snow before nightfall. The town was quiet when they arrived, most people staying indoors against the bitter wind. Clara left Tom at the general store and went to the land office alone. The clerk looked nervous when she walked in. Miss Vance, I wasn't expecting— I need to see all land claims filed by Marcus Harding in the past 2 years, Clara said, and any water rights petitions, boundary disputes, or easement requests associated with his properties. That's a lot of documents. It might take some time. I have time. Clara pulled out a chair and sat down. I'll wait. The clerk disappeared into the back room. Clara could hear him shuffling papers, muttering to himself. When he returned 20 minutes later, he carried a stack of files that he set on the desk with a heavy thud. This is everything, he said. But Miss Vance, I should warn you, Mr. Harding won't like you poking around in his business. Mr. Harding doesn't get to dictate what public records I can examine. Clara opened the first file. Thank you for your help. She spent the next 4 hours reading through documents, taking careful notes. A pattern emerged that was even uglier than she'd expected. Harding filed claims on water sources that bordered other ranchers' properties, forcing them to negotiate access or move their herds. He bought up debt from local banks, then called it in when ranchers had bad years, acquiring land for a fraction of its value. He filed boundary disputes based on old surveys that contradicted newer, more accurate measurements. Every move was technically legal. That was the genius of it. He operated within the system, Used the law as a weapon, made his victims look foolish for complaining about practices that were just business. But taken together, the pattern was damning. This wasn't a successful rancher expanding through honest means. This was predatory acquisition, systematic and deliberate. Clara copied down names, dates, transaction amounts. By the time she finished, her hand was cramping, and the winter sun was already starting to set. She found Tom at the general store, shared what she'd learned over coffee at the hotel restaurant. He's been doing this for years, she said, keeping her voice low. 23 separate acquisitions, most of them under duress. He's built his empire by crushing everyone around him. Tom shook his head. How do we prove it's connected? Each deal probably looks legitimate on its own. That's exactly the problem, and exactly what we need to show, that it's not isolated incidents, it's a pattern, a strategy. Clara stirred her coffee, thinking. We need testimony. People willing to say what really happened, how Harding pressured them, what threats he made off the record. You think they'll talk? Most of them probably signed agreements to stay quiet. Some will. The ones who lost everything, who have nothing left to lose, they might be angry enough to speak up. Clara looked at Tom. It's a risk, but it's the only way to make this stick. They rode back to the ranch through the gathering darkness, making it home just as the first snowflakes began to fall. Rhett was waiting for them in the barn, and Clara could tell from his expression that his news wasn't good. Morrisons won't talk, he said without preamble. They're too scared. Harding threatened to ruin them completely if they ever spoke against him. Same with the Johnsons. They signed confidentiality agreements as part of the sale. Clara's heart sank, but she pushed through it. What about the others? The families from 3, 4 years ago. Haven't reached them all yet, but the ones I did talk to. Rhett pulled off his gloves, slapped them against his thigh in frustration. They're broken, Clara. He didn't just take their land, he destroyed their spirit. They're not going to stand up and fight. Then we fight without them. Clara's voice came out harder than she intended. We have the documentation. We have the pattern. We prove the water rights are ours. We show his history of predatory practices, and we make enough noise that people in power have to pay attention. People in power are usually in Harding's pocket, Dutch said. He'd appeared from the tack room, clearly listening. Judge Patterson owes Harding money. Sheriff Barnes looks the other way on anything Harding's men do. Even the mayor. Then we go over their heads, Clara interrupted. Territorial governor, federal land office, newspapers in Denver or Cheyenne, places where Harding's influence doesn't reach. She looked between Rhett and Dutch. We make this too big to ignore, too public to bury. That's how we win. The silence that followed felt heavy with doubt, but finally Rhett nodded. All right, we try it your way. But it's going to take time, and Harding's not going to wait patiently while we build our case. He was right. 3 days later, the barn burned. Clara woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. She threw on her coat over her nightgown, shoved her feet into boots, and ran outside into chaos. The barn was engulfed, flames reaching toward the black sky, the sound of terrified horses screaming inside. Dutch and Sam were already there, throwing open the corral gates to let the animals out. Tom ran past Clara carrying buckets of water, useless against a fire this size, but they had to try. Rhett emerged from the smoke leading 2 panicked horses, his face black with soot. How many still inside? Clara shouted over the roar of the flames. 3 horses, maybe 4, Rhett choked out. Too much smoke, can't see. Clara didn't think. She grabbed a wet cloth from Tom, tied it over her mouth and nose, and ran toward the barn entrance. Behind her, someone yelled for her to stop, but the sound of horses screaming overrode everything else. The heat was incredible. The smoke was worse, thick and black, making it impossible to see more than a few feet. Clara dropped low where the air was clearer, felt her way along the stalls. The first horse she found was already down, overcome by smoke. She couldn't help it. The second was standing but wild-eyed, too terrified to move. Clara grabbed its halter, pulled hard. Come on, you stubborn bastard. Move. The horse reared, nearly striking her, but she held on and pulled again. This time it followed, stumbling through the smoke toward the rectangle of open air and firelight that marked the door. They burst out together and Clara shoved the horse toward the corral, turned to go back in. Rhett caught her arm. No, it's coming down. There's still... I know. His face was anguished. But if you go back in there, you die. And I'm not losing you for a horse we probably can't save anyway. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to fight, But even as she opened her mouth, the barn roof collapsed with a sound like thunder. Sparks and burning debris shot into the sky. The horses still inside never had a chance. They fought the fire through the night, keeping it from spreading to the other buildings, watching 30 years of structure and supplies burn to ash. By dawn, nothing remained but smoking timbers and the sick smell of burned flesh and wood. The crew gathered in front of the ruins, exhausted and covered in soot. Mrs. Gable brought coffee that no one had energy to drink. Young Jack was crying quietly, trying to hide it. Tom just stared at the wreckage like he couldn't process what he was seeing. "It was set," Dutch said flatly. He pointed to the perimeter of the burn. "See how it started in 3 different places? And the doors were chained from outside. That's why the horses couldn't get out." He looked at Rhett. "This was deliberate." Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. "Harding, probably. Or someone he paid." Rhett's voice was hollow. 4 horses dead, all our winter hay stores, most of our tools intact, equipment we can't replace until spring." He turned away from the ruins. "He's trying to break us before winter really hits, make it impossible to operate." "Then we rebuild," Clara said. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once they were out, she committed to them. "We rebuild stronger. We don't let him win by destroying us." "With what?" Young Jack's voice cracked. "We don't have the supplies, don't have the time before the heavy snows come. Then we make time, we buy supplies, we work double shifts." Clara looked at each of them in turn. "Or we give up. We let Harding take what he wants because he was willing to burn us out and we weren't willing to fight back." "Is that what we're doing?" Sam straightened. "No, that's not what we're doing." "Damn right it's not," Dutch said. "We've survived worse than one burned barn." "Have we?" Tom asked quietly. "I'm not questioning, I'm really asking. Can we survive this?" Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know. But I know if we don't try, we've already lost." He looked at Clara. "You really think we can rebuild before winter?" "I think we don't have a choice." Clara gestured to the ranch around them. "This is our home, our livelihood, everything we've worked for. We either fight for it or we walk away. And I'm not walking away." The decision made, they moved into action. Rhett and Dutch rode to town to buy lumber and supplies, maxing out credit they'd been careful to avoid using. Clara and Mrs. Gable inventoried what was salvageable from the barn wreckage. Some tools, a few pieces of tack, not much else. The younger hands started clearing the debris, preparing the site for rebuilding. By the time Rhett returned with 2 loaded wagons, they had the foundation cleared and ready. The work that followed was brutal. 16-hour days in the freezing cold, raising walls and framing the roof while snow fell around them. Clara learned to swing a hammer without hitting her thumb, to measure and cut boards, to work alongside men who no longer questioned whether she belonged there. She also learned what it felt like to push past exhaustion into something else, a kind of focused determination that overrode pain and cold and doubt. When her hands bled from splinters and her shoulders screamed from lifting heavy beams, she thought about Harding watching from his comfortable ranch house, waiting for them to quit. That image was enough to keep her going. 10 days after the fire, they had walls and a roof. It wasn't pretty. The new barn looked rough and unfinished compared to the old one, but it was functional. It would protect the animals and supplies through the winter. It proved they couldn't be broken by one act of sabotage. The night they finished, the crew gathered in the main house for dinner. Mrs. Gable had made a stew that actually tasted like celebration, despite their depleted stores. There was even whiskey, Dutch's private reserve that he'd been saving for something important. "To the ugliest barn in Montana territory," Tom said, raising his glass. "To the barn that shouldn't exist but does anyway," Sam added. "To not giving up," young Jack said quietly. They drank. And for a moment Clara let herself feel the victory. They'd done it. Against odds, against time, against an enemy who wanted them destroyed, they'd done it. But the moment didn't last. Rhett set down his glass, his expression troubled. "We need to talk about what comes next. The barn's rebuilt, but we're vulnerable. Low on cash, low on supplies, winter's here, and we're barely holding on. One more hit like that fire, and we're done." "Then we make sure there isn't another hit," Clara said. "We go public with what we know about Harding. Force him into the light where people can see what he's doing." "How?" Dutch asked. We've got evidence, sure, but no one who'll testify against him. We've got theories, but no proof he set the fire. Clara had been thinking about this for days, turning it over in her mind while she hammered nails and hauled lumber. We don't need proof he set the fire. We just need to make it clear what the pattern is. Harding wants land. People who own that land suffer mysterious accidents. Harding ends up with the property. We document every instance we can find. We publish it in newspapers where his influence doesn't reach, and we make him so toxic that even his allies have to distance themselves. That's a hell of a gamble, Sam said. You're betting he cares more about his reputation than he does about getting this ranch. I'm betting that a man who's built his empire through careful manipulation of the law and public opinion will care very much when that reputation gets shredded publicly. Clara leaned forward. Men like Harding operate in the shadows. They rely on victims being too afraid or too isolated to fight back. We take away the shadows, and suddenly he has to answer questions he's been avoiding for years. Rhett studied her face. You've thought this through. I've thought about nothing else. Clara pulled out the notes she'd been compiling. Names, dates, property transfers, all the pieces of Harding's pattern. We write this up clearly. We send it to papers in Cheyenne, Denver, maybe even St. Louis. We make it a story about corruption and predatory business practices. We make him the villain and us the victims fighting back. We're opening ourselves up for retaliation, Mrs. Gable pointed out. You think the fire was bad. Wait until you've publicly humiliated a man with Harding's resources. I know. Clara didn't flinch from the older woman's gaze. But I also know that right now we're losing. Slowly, maybe, but losing. This is the only move I can see that changes the game instead of just delaying the inevitable. The room was quiet. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Clara could feel the weight of everyone's doubt, their fear, their exhaustion. She couldn't blame them. What she was proposing was risky, possibly stupid, definitely dangerous. But it was also the only path forward she could see. Finally, Rhett spoke. All right, we do it. Clara, you write it up. You're better with words than any of us. Dutch, I want you and the boys on high alert. If we're going to poke this bear, we need to be ready for him to bite back. Mrs. Gable, inventory everything we can afford to lose versus what we absolutely need. If things go sideways, I want to know our priorities for protecting. The meeting broke up, everyone moving to their tasks. Clara sat at the table with her notes, a fresh sheet of paper, and an inkwell. Writing had always come easily to her. Too easily, her mother used to say, another mark of her unwomanly interests. But now those skills mattered. She wrote for 3 hours, crafting a narrative that was factual but compelling, detailed but accessible. She named names, cited documents, built a case that even someone with no legal knowledge could follow. When she finished, she read it through twice, making small edits, tightening the language. It was good, maybe even good enough to work. Rhett read it the next morning over coffee. When he finished, he set it down carefully. This is going to make him furious. I know. You understand what you're starting here? This isn't just a legal fight anymore. This is war. Clara met his eyes. It's been war since he burned our barn. We're just finally fighting back. Fair enough. Rhett folded the pages. I'll take this to town today, send it to every paper you've listed. Then we wait and see what happens. What do you think will happen? Rhett was quiet for a moment. I think we've either just saved the ranch or destroyed it. No way to know which until the smoke clears. He left an hour later, riding through fresh snow toward town. Clara watched him go, then turned back to the work that never stopped. Animals to feed, water to haul, 1,000 small tasks that kept the ranch running. But beneath the routine, tension hummed like a plucked string. 3 days passed with no word. Then 4. On the 5th day, a rider came up from town at a gallop, sliding off his horse before it had fully stopped. "Rhett Calder here?" the man gasped. Dutch stepped out of the barn. "He's checking the north pasture. What's this about?" The papers published the story, all of them. Cheyenne, Denver, even got picked up by a St. Louis daily. The rider caught his breath. "It's causing a hell of a stir. Territorial governor's calling for an investigation. Federal Land Office is reviewing all of Harding's water claims. And Harding himself..." The man paused. "He's denied everything, says it's all lies from a bitter competitor. But people are talking, actually questioning him for the first time in years." Clara felt something fierce and bright bloom in her chest. "It's working." "Maybe," the writer said, But you should know, Harding's put out word that you and Rhett are liars and thieves. Says he's got evidence you falsified documents. He's pushing back hard. Let him push, Clara said. We've got truth on our side. The writer looked at her with something like pity. Ma'am, I hope you're right, but Harding's got money and lawyers and friends in high places. Truth don't always win against that. After the writer left, Clara stood in the yard staring at the mountains. She'd done what she thought was right, what she believed was necessary. But standing there in the cold morning light, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just set something in motion that would consume them all. Rhett returned at dusk, his face grim. You heard? Some. Tell me the rest. They walked away from the buildings out toward the corral where they could talk privately. Rhett leaned against the fence, looking out at the darkening sky. It's chaos in town. Half the people think we're heroes for standing up to Harding. The other half thinks we're troublemakers who deserve whatever we get. The governor's office sent someone to start investigating, but Harding's already working to discredit them. His lawyers are filing motions to dismiss the water rights challenge. And, he paused, your father's involved now. Clara's stomach dropped. What? He gave an interview to one of the papers. Said you're unstable, prone to delusions, that you ran away from home, and he's been worried about your mental state ever since. Said you're probably being manipulated by me, that none of your claims can be trusted because you're not a reliable witness to anything. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised her, but it did. Even now, even after everything, some small part of her had hoped her father might stay neutral. That hope died hard. It doesn't matter, she said, though her voice shook slightly. He can say what he wants. It doesn't change the facts. Clara T. I mean it. He's doing exactly what I expected him to do, protecting his own interests, his reputation, his social standing. This is who he is. And it doesn't change what we know about Harding. She turned to face Rhett. Does it change anything? About the investigation, the water rights claim, any of it? I don't know. Maybe. Your father's well respected in town. If he's saying you're unreliable, then we find other witnesses, other evidence. We prove the case without relying on my testimony alone. Clara's mind was already racing ahead. The clerk at the land office saw the same documents I did. The ranchers Harding displaced, even if they won't testify in person, their property records tell the story. We build around my father's attack instead of letting it stop us. Rhett studied her face in the fading light. You're not going to break, are you? No. Even if this gets worse, even if Harding comes at us harder, if your whole family turns against you publicly, if we lose everything trying to fight this? Clara thought about the girl who'd left her family's house months ago, desperate and angry and so tired of being dismissed. She thought about the woman she'd become, stronger, capable, sure of her own worth in a way she'd never been before. I've already lost the things that didn't matter, she said. I'm not losing the things that do. Not without a fight. Rhett reached out and squeezed her shoulder briefly. Then we keep fighting. The next weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering, public accusations, and escalating tension. The territorial investigator interviewed everyone at the ranch, examined the water rights documents, inspected the burned barn. Harding's lawyers filed countersuit, claiming Rhett had been encroaching on Harding's land for years. The newspapers ate it up, running competing stories that painted both sides as either heroes or villains, depending on who'd paid for the coverage. Through it all, Clara kept working. She fed animals and hauled water and helped Dutch repair fence. She wrote follow-up statements when the investigator requested them. She endured the stares and whispers when she went to town, the pointed comments about women who didn't know their place, the speculation about her relationship with Rhett. And slowly, gradually, public opinion began to shift. It started with a small paper in a mining town 3 counties over, run by an editor who'd been squeezed out by Harding's business practices years before. He published a detailed analysis of Harding's acquisition pattern, complete with maps showing how his holdings formed a deliberate noose around smaller ranchers. Other papers picked it up. Then a Denver journalist traveled to the territory to investigate firsthand, interviewed the displaced families, and wrote a series of articles that made Harding's practices impossible to ignore. By mid-December, the territorial governor ordered a full review of all water rights claims in the region. The federal land office suspended Harding's pending acquisitions pending investigation. And a lawyer from Cheyenne contacted Rhett about representing several ranchers in a class action suit against Harding's business practices. They were winning. Not completely, not yet, but winning. And then Clara's father came to the ranch. She was in the barn when Mrs. Gable found her. "Clara, you have a visitor." Something in the older woman's tone made Clara's stomach clench. "Who?" "See for yourself." Clara walked to the main house and found her father standing in the front yard, looking thoroughly out of place in his city clothes and polished boots. He'd aged since she last saw him, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his mouth. He looked tired, almost frail. "Clara," he said, "we need to talk." She crossed her arms. "I can't imagine what we'd have to talk about." "Please, just hear me out. 5 minutes." Clara considered refusing. It would be satisfying to walk away, to give him the same dismissal he'd given her for 23 years. But curiosity won. 5 minutes. Talk. Her father glanced at the ranch hands, watching from various positions around the yard. "Can we go somewhere private?" "No. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." He flinched, but nodded. "All right. I came to ask you to drop this fight with Harding. Walk away, settle quietly, before this destroys everything." Clara laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Destroys everything? He burned our barn. He's been trying to steal our water rights. He's crushed every rancher who stood in his way. And you want me to walk away?" "He's willing to negotiate. I've spoken with him. He's prepared to offer fair market value for the ranch, guaranteed employment for you and Rhett elsewhere, a clean exit with your reputations intact." "He sent you here to negotiate his surrender?" Clara couldn't believe it. "That's what this is?" "He sent me here to prevent a tragedy." Her father's voice hardened. "Clara, you don't understand what you're up against. Harding has resources, connections, power you can't imagine. He's been patient because he thought you'd come to your senses. But you keep pushing, keep making this public, and eventually he's going to stop being patient. And when that happens, we'll deal with it." Clara took a step closer to her father. "You really came all the way up here to tell me to give up? To hand over everything we fought for because fighting makes you uncomfortable?" "I came because you're my daughter, and I don't want to see you hurt. You watched me hurt for 23 years and never did a thing about it. Don't pretend you care now just because I'm embarrassing you." Clara's voice stayed level, but she felt the old anger rising. "You stood by while Mother and my sisters made my life hell. You did nothing when they celebrated me leaving. And now you show up with Harding's offer, and you want me to believe this is about protecting me?" Her father's face reddened. "I did my best with you, Clara. You were always difficult, always questioning, always making things harder than they needed to be. I was a child who wanted to be seen." Clara's voice cracked slightly. "I wanted someone to notice that I was smart, that I had value, that I deserved more than being treated like a burden. And instead of seeing me, you punished me for not being easier to ignore." "That's not fair." "It's completely fair." Clara felt something break loose in her chest, years of hurt and anger and disappointment finally finding words. "You taught me how to think strategically, how to read people, how to play the long game. Then you were disappointed when I actually used those skills instead of just smiling and marrying whoever you picked out. You wanted a daughter who was smart enough to make you look good, but not smart enough to have opinions of her own. And when I didn't fit that mold, you wrote me off." Her father opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in Clara's memory, he looked genuinely uncertain. "I'm not dropping the fight," Clara continued. "I'm not walking away. I'm not making this easier for Harding, or for you, or for anyone else who thinks I should just accept whatever scraps I'm offered. This ranch is my home, these people are my family, and I'm going to fight for them with everything I've got." She straightened. "Your 5 minutes are up. You should go." "Clara, go." He stood there a moment longer, seeming to search for words. Then he turned and walked to his horse, mounted with slow, deliberate movements. He looked back once before riding away, and Clara saw something in his expression that might have been regret, or maybe just annoyance that his negotiation had failed. She didn't care which. Rhett appeared at her elbow as her father disappeared over the ridge. "You all right?" "I'm fine." Clara surprised herself by meaning it. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I just told my father the truth for the first time in my life, and I don't regret a single word. He'll tell Harding the negotiation failed. Good. Let him know exactly where we stand." Clara turned back toward the barn. "We've got work to do. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about the confrontation with her father, replaying the words, testing her feelings. She waited for the guilt, the doubt, the old familiar pain of disappointing him. It never came. Instead, she felt lighter, like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Her father's approval didn't matter anymore. His opinion of her choices, his disappointment in who she'd become, none of it had power over her. She'd stopped being his daughter in any meaningful sense months ago. Now she was just Clara. Rancher, partner, fighter. The woman who'd rebuilt a barn in winter and refused to quit when powerful men tried to break her. That was enough. More than enough. Outside, new snow began to fall, covering the mountain in white silence. Inside, Clara closed her eyes and slept deeply, dreamlessly. The sleep of someone who'd finally stopped waiting for permission to be herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Harding would push back harder now that negotiation had failed. The legal battles would continue. The winter would get worse before it got better. But tonight, Clara Vance rested easy. Because she'd faced her past and survived it. She'd chosen her present and owned it. And whatever came next, she'd meet it standing tall. The snow that fell that night kept falling for 3 days straight. The kind of storm that locked the world down and reminded everyone that nature didn't care about human conflicts. They were trapped at the ranch, no riding to town, no checking distant pastures, nothing but the immediate work of keeping animals fed and buildings clear of snow that piled higher each hour. Clara spent those days in close quarters with the crew, learning things about people that only came out during forced proximity. Sam had a daughter back east he hadn't seen in 4 years, sent money when he could, but feared she'd forgotten his face. Tom wrote letters to his mother every week, carefully crafted lies about how well he was doing because the truth would worry her. Young Jack, despite his earlier swagger, was terrified of the dark and slept with a lamp burning low beside his bunk. Mrs. Gable, who Clara had thought knew everything about everyone, turned out to have secrets of her own. On the second night of the storm, over coffee, while they waited for bread to rise, the older woman finally talked about the husband she'd lost 20 years ago. Died in winter, storm like this one, Mrs. Gable said, staring into her cup. Went out to check the animals, got turned around in the snow. We found him 3 days later, frozen not 50 yards from the barn. Close enough to see the light if he'd just looked up instead of down. She took a sip. I stayed on because Rhett's father needed someone to keep house, and because leaving meant admitting John was really gone. Easier to just keep working. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly. Don't be. It was a long time ago, and feeling sorry doesn't change anything. Mrs. Gable set down her cup with a sharp click. I'm telling you because you need to understand something. This life, ranch life, mountain life, it takes things from you. Sometimes it takes everything, and you have to decide before that happens whether what you're building is worth what you're losing. Clara thought about what she'd already lost. Her family, her old life, the comfortable certainty of knowing her place, even if that place was small and suffocating. I've made that decision. Have you? Because it's easy to say when you're still new to all this, when the losses haven't really hit yet. Wait until you've been here 5 years, 10, and the isolation starts wearing on you. Wait until something happens to Rhett or to this ranch, and you're faced with starting over from nothing again. Then see if you still think it was worth it. You're still here, Clara pointed out. After 20 years and losing your husband, you stayed. Mrs. Gable's expression softened slightly. I did, but I also know the cost. I'm just making sure you count it too before it's too late to change your mind. The storm finally broke on the 4th day, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The men dug paths to the barn, the outbuildings, the corral. They found 2 calves that had frozen despite their best efforts, but the rest of the herd had survived huddled together in the lee of a hillside. Rhett stood looking at the dead calves, his face expressionless. Dutch started to say something about it not being anyone's fault, but Rhett just shook his head. Get them cleared before the wolves find them, and check the rest of the herd for frostbite. The work resumed its normal rhythm, but something felt different. Maybe it was the storm, the reminder that winter was the real enemy, and their human conflicts were small by comparison. Maybe it was just exhaustion catching up with all of them. But the tension that had been running high since the barn burn seemed to ease slightly. That lasted exactly 2 days. On the morning of the 6th day after the storm, a rider came up from town, pushing his horse hard through the deep snow. Clara saw him from the kitchen window and felt her stomach clench. Nothing good came at that speed. Rhett met the rider in the yard. Clara couldn't hear the conversation from inside, but she saw Rhett's posture change, saw his hands curl into fists. When he came into the house a few minutes later, his face was carved from stone. "The territorial investigator is dead," he said without preamble. "Thrown from his horse on the road back to Cheyenne. Broke his neck." Clara felt the floor tilt slightly. "When?" "2 days ago. They're calling it an accident. Horse spooked by a snake, bad luck, tragic but not suspicious." Rhett's voice was flat, controlled. "Except it's winter. There are no snakes." And the investigator was an experienced rider who'd traveled those roads a dozen times before. "Harding," Dutch said. He'd followed Rhett inside, his face grim. "Has to be. Probably. But there's no proof. Just like there's no proof he burned our barn, no proof he's been threatening other ranchers, no proof of anything except what we can't prove." Rhett slammed his hand against the table, making the coffee cups jump. "And now the investigation dies with him. The governor's office is already backing off, saying there's not enough evidence to continue without the lead investigator's testimony." Clara's mind raced. What about the documents? The evidence we provided, the pattern we documented, means nothing without someone willing to push it forward. And everyone who might have pushed just got a very clear message about what happens when you go after Marcus Harding. Rhett crossed to the window, stared out at the snow-covered mountains. "We're back where we started. Except now Harding knows exactly how we fight, and he's already figured out how to counter it." The room fell silent. Clara could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the crackle of the fire, her own heartbeat loud in her ears. Everything they'd worked for, all the risk they'd taken going public, it was collapsing around them. "So what do we do?" Tom asked quietly. "Just give up?" "No." Clara's voice came out harder than she intended. "We don't give up. We adapt." Rhett turned to look at her. "Adapt how?" "The legal route is dead. The public pressure campaign worked for about 5 minutes before Harding shut it down." "What's left?" Clara thought about her father's visit, about the offer Harding had sent through him. Fair market value, guaranteed employment, a clean exit. It had sounded like surrender at the time, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was Harding showing his hand, revealing what he actually wanted. "He's trying to buy us out because he doesn't want to fight anymore," Clara said slowly, working through it as she spoke. "Think about it. If he was certain he could crush us, he wouldn't negotiate. He'd just take what he wants. But he sent my father with an offer, which means we've hurt him more than we think." "Or it means he's being smart," Sam said. "Why fight when you can buy victory cheaper?" "Because men like Harding don't just want to win. They want to dominate. They want their enemies broken and humiliated." Clara started pacing, energy building. "But he offered us a clean exit. Our reputation's intact, employment guaranteed. That's not domination. That's damage control. He's worried." Dutch leaned back in his chair. "Say you're right. Say we've actually got him worried. How does that help us? We're still outgunned, outspent, and out of legal options. We stop fighting his fight and make him fight ours," Clara said. "He wins in courtrooms and through political pressure. But out here?" She gestured to the mountains beyond the window. "Out here, we have the advantage. We know this land. We know how to survive in conditions that would kill his hired men. And most importantly, we're not going anywhere." Rhett's expression shifted, understanding dawning. "You want to outlast him. I want to make it too expensive for him to keep pushing. Every move he makes against us, we counter. He burns a barn. We rebuild it. He files legal challenges. We document and publicize them. He sends men to intimidate us. We stand our ground." Clara stopped pacing, looked at each of them in turn. "We make ourselves such a persistent, annoying, costly problem that eventually taking this ranch isn't worth it anymore." "That could take years," Mrs. Gable said. "Then it takes years." Clara's voice was steady. "I'm not leaving. This is my home, and I'm done letting men like Harding take things from me just because they think they're entitled to them." Young Jack spoke up, his voice uncertain. "What if he escalates? What if next time it's not a barn that burns, it's the house? Or," he swallowed hard, "or worse. Then we deal with it when it happens." Rhett's voice had lost its defeated edge. "Claire's right. We've been playing defense, reacting to Harding's moves. Time to make him react to ours." Over the next week, they fortified. Dutch and Sam installed better locks on all the buildings, set up a rotation for night watch that ensured someone was always awake and armed. Tom and young Jack took inventory of their ammunition, weapons, and defensive positions. Clara and Mrs. Gable stockpiled food and medical supplies, preparing for the possibility of being cut off from town for extended periods. And Rhett made a trip to visit every small rancher within 2 days' ride, not to ask them to stand against Harding, he knew they wouldn't, but to quietly let them know the Calder Ranch was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to be bought or bullied out. "You hear things," Rhett said when he returned from the last of these visits. "Rumors, mostly, but consistent ones. Harding's had trouble keeping hands lately. Men who work for him end up doing things they're not comfortable with, and word spreads. He's burning through hired guns faster than he can replace them." "Because there's a difference between working for a hard man and working for an evil one," Dutch said. "Most cowboys will do rough work, but there's lines they won't cross. Burning barns with horses inside crosses that line." Clara felt a small spark of hope. So his resources aren't unlimited. He's having the same problems we are, finding good people willing to do hard things for the right reasons. Or in his case, the wrong ones. Rhett poured coffee for everyone gathered around the table. "The point is, time might actually be on our side. The longer this drags out, the more it costs him in reputation and resources. Eventually, even Marcus Harding has limits." The winter deepened. January came in brutal and cold, temperatures dropping so low that water froze in the troughs faster than they could break the ice. The cattle huddled together for warmth, their breath creating clouds of steam in the frigid air. The crew worked in shifts, no one staying outside longer than necessary, everyone watching for signs of frostbite or worse. It was during one of these bitter cold stretches that Clara found herself alone in the barn with Rhett, both of them working to distribute hay to the horses. The silence between them had become comfortable over the months, but tonight it felt weighted with something unspoken. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said, hefting another bale. "Go ahead. Why did you really choose me? And don't give me that answer about seeing me stand up for Mrs. Patterson at the store. There has to be more to it than that." Rhett was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling on the hay. "You want the truth?" "Always. I was lonely." The words came out simple, unadorned. "Not for company. I had the hands, had Mrs. Gable. But lonely for someone who understood that being difficult isn't the same as being wrong, that asking questions isn't the same as causing trouble, that wanting more than what you're offered doesn't make you ungrateful, it makes you human." He looked at her directly. "I saw you and I thought, there's someone who knows what it's like to be the problem because you won't be small." Clara felt something shift in her chest. "That's why you gave me a choice. That day you came to the house. That's why I gave you a choice. Because I'd spent my whole life having choices made for me. My father deciding how the ranch would run, society deciding how I should act, everyone deciding who I should be. I wasn't going to do that to someone else." He went back to distributing hay. "Of course, I didn't expect you to be quite so good at all this. Thought you'd struggle more, need more help. Instead, you've probably saved this ranch 3 times over with your ideas and your refusal to quit." "We've saved it together," Clara said. "That's what partners do." Rhett looked at her again, something complicated in his expression. "Is that what we are? Partners?" Clara considered the question. They weren't married, hadn't even discussed the arrangement beyond the practical terms. They lived in the same house, worked the same land, fought the same battles. But what were they to each other, really? "Yes," she said finally. "That's exactly what we are." Something in Rhett's face relaxed. "Good. That's good." They finished the work in companionable silence, and when they walked back to the house through the biting cold, Clara realized she was happy, not in spite of the danger they faced, not in spite of the hard work and the uncertainty, but because of it. Because she'd found a place where being herself, stubborn, opinionated, difficult, wasn't a flaw to overcome, but a strength to employ. February brought a thaw, just enough to turn the snow slushy and make the roads passable again. With it came news from town. Harding had filed new claims against the ranch, alleging trespassing and illegal water usage. More legal harassment, more attempts to drag them into court where he had the advantage. Rhett read the papers and tossed them onto the table with disgust. He's not even trying to make it look legitimate anymore. These claims are so obviously false, anyone with eyes can see it. That's not the point, Clara said, scanning the documents. The point is to cost us time and money fighting them. Every hour we spend in court is an hour we're not working the ranch. Every dollar we spend on lawyers is a dollar we don't have for supplies or repairs. She set down the papers. He's trying to bleed us dry through attrition. So how do we counter it? Clara thought for a moment. We represent ourselves. No lawyers, no legal fees, just us, showing up with our documents and our truth, making him work for every inch. You know anything about courtroom procedure? No, but I can read and I'm good at making arguments. How hard can it be? Harder than she expected, as it turned out. The first hearing was a disaster. Clara stumbled through objections she didn't understand, got technical procedures wrong, and watched Harding's expensive lawyer run circles around her inexperience. The judge dismissed the case, but not before making it clear he thought Clara was wasting everyone's time. She rode home in furious silence, went straight to her room, and allowed herself exactly 10 minutes of crying from sheer frustration. Then she dried her eyes, pulled out every legal book Rhett owned, and started studying. The second hearing went better. Not good, but better. Clara knew the procedures this time, could object at the right moments, didn't let Harding's lawyer intimidate her. The judge still ruled against them on a technicality, but afterward Dutch clapped her on the shoulder and said, "You're learning. That's what matters." The third, fourth, and fifth hearings became almost routine. Harding filed frivolous claims. Clara showed up to refute them. The judge ruled, however, politics and money dictated. But with each appearance, Clara got better at the game. She learned which arguments worked, which judges could be swayed by facts versus which ones had already been bought. She learned to speak the language of the law well enough to make Harding's lawyers work for their victories. And most importantly, she made it expensive. Every hearing cost Harding legal fees. Every appearance reminded people that the Calder Ranch was still fighting. Small victories maybe, but victories nonetheless. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, the snow retreating in patches to reveal brown grass and muddy ground. The cattle that had survived the winter looked lean but healthy. The new barn had weathered the storms. And the crew had developed into something more than hired hands working for wages. They'd become a unit bound by shared struggle and mutual respect. That's when Clara's father came back. She was working in the vegetable garden trying to coax early peas into growth when Mrs. Gable called from the house. "Clara, your father's here." Clara stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands. "Send him away." "I tried. He says he's not leaving until he talks to you." With a sigh, Clara walked to the house. Her father waited on the porch, looking even more worn than the last time she'd seen him. His clothes were rumpled, his face haggard. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well in weeks. "What do you want?" Clara asked without preamble. "To apologize." The words seemed to cost him something. "And to ask for help." Clara laughed, the sound bitter. "You came to the wrong place for help. Please, just listen." Her father's voice cracked. "I'm ruined, Clara, completely ruined. I made some investments based on Harding's advice. He said they were sure things, guaranteed returns. Turns out they were schemes, and when they collapsed, they took everything I had. The house, the business, everything. Your mother and sisters, they've moved in with your aunt in Boston. I'm living in a boarding house and working as a clerk." Clara felt no satisfaction at the news, just a hollow sort of resignation. "And you came here because you thought I'd help you?" "I came because you're my daughter, and I'm desperate, and I don't know where else to turn." Her father's eyes were red-rimmed. "I was wrong about you. About everything. I see that now. You were never the problem. I was. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for how I treated you, for what I let your mother and sisters do, for sending you away like you were worthless." Clara studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, of another angle, but all she saw was genuine despair. A broken man who'd lost everything and finally understood what he'd thrown away when he dismissed his smartest daughter as difficult. "What kind of help are you asking for?" she said carefully. "A place to stay. Work, if you have it. I can do manual labor, help around the ranch. I'm not proud anymore, Clara. I just need somewhere to go, someone who'll give me a chance." He swallowed hard. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I have no right to ask. But I'm asking anyway." Clara felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was her father, the man who'd ignored her, dismissed her, ultimately sent her away. He'd supported her mother's cruelty, allowed her sister's mockery, given an interview calling her unstable to protect his own reputation. But he was also broken, desperate, genuinely remorseful in a way she'd never seen before. And some part of her, the part that still remembered being a little girl who just wanted her father to be proud of her, wanted to believe the apology was real. "No," she said quietly. Her father's face crumpled. "Clara, please." "No," she repeated, her voice steady. "I'm not giving you a place here. I'm not rescuing you from the consequences of your own choices. You helped Harding because you thought he'd make you money. You threw me under questioning because you thought it would protect your reputation. You came here last time to negotiate my surrender because he asked you to. And now that it's all blown up in your face, you want me to save you. I know I made mistakes. They weren't mistakes. They were choices. Deliberate choices to put your comfort, your wealth, your status above your own daughter's well-being." Clara took a breath, keeping her voice level. "I spent 23 years trying to earn your approval, your respect, just basic acknowledgement that I mattered. And I never got it. Not once. You know when I finally felt like I mattered? The day I left. The day I walked away from you and everything you represented and built a life on my own terms. I understand that you're angry. I'm not angry anymore. That's what you don't understand. I'm done being angry at you, done caring what you think, done letting your opinion of me have any power over my life." Clara looked at the man who'd given her life but never really seen her. "You taught me to think strategically, to analyze situations, to plan ahead. Those skills have saved this ranch more than once. So thank you for that. But everything else I've learned, how to work hard, how to stand up for myself, how to be part of something bigger than my own ambitions, I learned in spite of you, not because of you." Her father stood there, tears running down his weathered face. "So that's it? You're just going to send me away? I'm going to let you experience what it feels like to be told you're not worth helping, to be dismissed by someone you came to in desperation." Clara's voice softened slightly. "There's a boarding house in town. Mrs. Patterson runs it. You remember her, the widow I stood up for at the general store. She's kind to people who've fallen on hard times, if they're willing to work. Tell her I sent you. She'll give you a chance." "But you won't." "No, I won't." Clara met his eyes directly. "Because I've learned that being family doesn't mean accepting abuse. It doesn't mean sacrificing myself to save someone who never protected me. And it doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen just because someone finally says they're sorry." She turned to walk back to the garden, then paused and looked back. "I hope you rebuild your life, I really do. But you'll have to do it the same way I rebuilt mine, without family support, without safety nets, by proving every day that you're worth something. Maybe then you'll understand why I couldn't just be the easy daughter you wanted." Her father stood on the porch for another moment, then turned and walked slowly to his horse. Clara watched him ride away, and this time when she searched for guilt or regret, she found only clarity. She'd made the right choice. Not the kind one, maybe, not the forgiving one, but the right one for her, for the life she'd built, for the person she'd become. Rhett found her in the garden an hour later, aggressively weeding around the pea shoots. He sat down on the fence rail and waited. "I sent him away," Clara said without looking up. "I know. Mrs. Gable told me." Rhett was quiet for a moment. "You all right?" "I think so. I thought I'd feel guilty or sad or something, but I just feel," she searched for the word, "free. Like I finally cut the last tie to people who never saw me clearly. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call." Rhett picked up a handful of dirt, let it sift through his fingers. "Family's supposed to be a foundation, something you build on. But if the foundation's rotten, sometimes the only thing to do is walk away and build something new." Clara sat back on her heels, looking at the mountains rising beyond the ranch. "Is that what we're doing, building something new? Feels like it." Rhett stood, brushed off his pants. "Speaking of which, Dutch found fresh tracks again this morning. Looks like Harding's men are back to watching us." Clara stood too, pulling off her gardening gloves. "Then we watch back, and we make sure they see we're not going anywhere." The rest of spring and into early summer was a cat-and-mouse game. Harding's men would appear on the ridges, watching. Clara and the crew would make obvious preparations, checking weapons, reinforcing defenses, making it clear they were ready for trouble. The watchers would report back. Harding would file more legal challenges. Clara would show up in court, better prepared each time. making it expensive and tedious. Neither side was winning, but neither side was losing either. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance began to shift. A newspaper article appeared questioning Harding's business practices. A territorial official started asking uncomfortable questions about the dead investigator. Two of Harding's major creditors called in loans, forcing him to liquidate assets. Small things, but they added up. In late June, the lawyer from Cheyenne who'd contacted them about the class action suit came to the ranch in person. He was a small man with sharp eyes and an aggressive handshake. "I've been documenting Harding's pattern for 6 months," he said, over coffee at the kitchen table. "I've got 12 ranchers willing to testify, 20 more who will provide written statements, and I've got evidence of systematic fraud in his water rights claims. This case, it's going to trial, and I think we can win." Clara looked at Rhett. "What do you think?" "I think we've been fighting alone for a long time. Having someone on our side who actually knows what they're doing sounds good." Rhett turned to the lawyer. "What do you need from us?" "Everything you've documented. Every hearing, every filing, every piece of evidence you've collected. You've done more legwork than you probably realize. Now we just need to present it properly." Over the next weeks, they provided everything they had. Clara's meticulous notes from court hearings, Rhett's documentation of property boundaries and water rights, testimony from the crew about the barn fire, all of it going into a case that would finally, officially, put Marcus Harding on trial for his practices. The trial was set for September. Until then, they waited, worked, and watched the summer unfold across the mountain. The cattle fattened on good grass. The garden produced more than they could eat. The new barn weathered a storm that would have tested the old one. And one evening in late August, sitting on the porch watching the sun set behind the peaks, Rhett said something that surprised Clara. "I've been thinking about making this official. The partnership, I mean." Clara looked at him. "It is official. We've been working together for almost a year." "I mean legally. Marriage, property rights, making sure if something happens to me, the ranch goes to you instead of some distant cousin I've never met." He wasn't looking at her, just staring at the mountains. "It doesn't have to be romantic or complicated. Just legal protection for what we've built." Clara considered this. Marriage as a business arrangement, a practical solution to a practical problem. It should have felt cold, transactional. Instead, it felt honest, a recognition of what they actually were to each other, partners in the truest sense, building something together that neither could have built alone. "All right," she said, "let's make it official." They were married 3 days later in the town office, with Dutch and Mrs. Gable as witnesses. No party, no celebration, just signatures on paper that made legal what had already been true for months. Clara kept her name. Rhett said it was her right, and besides, he liked that she was difficult about such things. That night, sitting in the house that was now officially hers as much as his, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the unwanted daughter to the difficult sister to the woman who'd walked away from everything familiar. She'd been tested, burned, pushed to the edge of breaking more times than she could count. But she hadn't broken. She'd bent, adapted, grown stronger in the broken places. And standing on the porch of her ranch, looking out at land she'd defended with everything she had, Clara Vance Calder finally understood what her father never had. She wasn't difficult because she was flawed. She was difficult because she was strong. And strength, in a world that wanted women to be soft and pliable and easily ignored, would always be labeled as a problem. Let them call her difficult. Let them call her stubborn, opinionated, too much. She'd wear those labels like armor and keep building the life she'd chosen, one hard day at a time. The trial would come in September. Harding would fight like a cornered animal. There would be more battles ahead, more tests, more moments where giving up seemed easier than pushing forward. But Clara wasn't going anywhere. This mountain, this ranch, this life, it was hers. She'd earned it through work and will and the refusal to be small, and no one was taking it from her. Not Marcus Harding, not the law, not the past she'd left behind, or the family that had never valued her. She'd made her choice, and she'd keep making it every single day for as long as she drew breath. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. September arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after storms have passed and before new ones gather. The aspens turned gold on the mountainsides. The air carried the first bite of coming autumn, and the trial date loomed exactly 2 weeks away. Clara stood in the barn watching Dutch work with a young colt, the animal skittish and uncertain, testing boundaries. She'd been doing a lot of that herself lately, testing boundaries, figuring out what she was capable of when pushed. The answer, she'd discovered, was more than she'd ever imagined. "You nervous about the trial?" Dutch asked, not looking away from the Colt. "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but I'm showing up anyway. That's the only way anything gets done. Show up scared and do it anyway." Dutch ran a hand along the Colt's flank, gentling him. "This one here, he's afraid of everything, but he's learning that fear doesn't have to stop him, just makes him more careful." Clara understood the lesson wasn't really about the horse. The lawyer from Cheyenne, his name was Morris Webb, arrived at the ranch a week before the trial with boxes of documents and a strategy that involved putting Harding's entire business history on display. He spread papers across the kitchen table while Mrs. Gable fed him coffee and irritation in equal measure. "The key is showing pattern and intent," Webb said, pointing to a timeline he'd constructed. "One bad deal could be business, 2 could be coincidence, but 23 systematic acquisitions using the same tactics? That's conspiracy to defraud. And with your testimony about the barn, the murdered investigator, the harassment, it builds a narrative that's hard to dismiss." "Harding's lawyers will dismiss it anyway," Clara said. She'd learned that much from her own court appearances. "They'll say we're disgruntled competitors making wild accusations. Let them try. We've got ranchers willing to testify under oath. We've got documentation they can't dispute. And we've got you." Webb looked at Clara directly. A woman who walked away from privilege to build something real, who fought back when powerful men tried to take it, who learned law well enough to represent herself in court. "You're a hell of a story, Mrs. Calder, and stories matter in trials." Clara shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not a story. I'm just someone who refused to quit. That's exactly what makes you compelling." Webb gathered his papers. "Harding's going to paint himself as a successful businessman being attacked by bitter failures. We need to flip that. Show him as a predator and you as someone who had the courage to stand up when everyone else was too afraid." After Webb left, Rhett found Clara in the garden, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. He sat on the fence and waited for her to speak first. It had become their pattern. He gave her space to work through things, trusted she'd talk when ready. "I don't want to be the hero of this story," Clara said finally. "I just want to keep the ranch." "You can be both. Can I? Because being the hero means living up to something, representing something bigger than myself. What if I'm not that person? What if I'm just stubborn and angry and tired of being pushed around?" Rhett was quiet for a moment. "You remember what you said to me the night we decided to fight back? You said you were done being small. That's not stubbornness, Clara. That's courage. And maybe you're right that you're angry and tired. Most people with courage usually are. But that doesn't make it less real." Clara pulled another weed, tossed it aside. "What if we lose?" "Then we lose. But we lose having fought for something that mattered, with everything we had. That's not nothing." The night before they were set to leave for Cheyenne, where the trial would be held, Clara couldn't sleep. She walked through the ranch in the darkness, checking on things that didn't need checking: the horses, the cattle, the new barn that still smelled of fresh lumber. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought to keep. She found Sam on night watch, sitting on the corral fence with his rifle across his knees. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much thinking." Clara climbed up to sit beside him. "You ever regret staying, working here instead of somewhere easier, somewhere that didn't come with barn fires and legal battles?" Sam considered the question. "Every job's got its own kind of hard. I worked ranches where the pay was better, but the boss treated us like equipment. Worked places where it was easy but meaningless, just going through motions for a paycheck." He looked at Clara. "Here, the work matters. The people matter. When I help build something, I'm actually building it, not just doing what I'm told. That's worth fighting for. Even if the fight might cost you everything, especially then." Sam shifted his rifle. "My daughter, the one back east, I haven't seen her in 4 years, but I send money every month and she writes me letters about school, about her life. She's getting educated, getting opportunities I never had. That's because I'm here, doing work that pays enough to give her a better chance." He paused. "If I let men like Harding take that away without fighting, what am I teaching her? That power always wins? That people like us should just accept whatever scraps we're offered?" Clara felt something tight in her chest loosen. No, we teach her that fighting matters even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the cattle stirred and settled. The mountain stood dark against the sky, ancient and indifferent to human struggles. But sitting there with Sam, Clara felt connected to something larger than the immediate fight, a long line of people who'd refused to be small, who'd stood up when it mattered, who'd built things worth defending. The trip to Cheyenne took 2 days. Clara, Rhett, and Webb made the journey together, stopping overnight at a boarding house where Clara lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds and fighting the urge to turn around and go home. By the time they reached Cheyenne, her nerves had settled into something harder and clearer: determination. The courthouse was an imposing stone building that seemed designed to make people feel small. Clara walked up the steps with her head high, refusing to be intimidated by architecture. Inside, the halls echoed with footsteps and low conversations. Lawyers in expensive suits clustered in corners. Witnesses waited on benches, their faces anxious. And sitting on a bench near the courtroom door, looking smaller and older than Clara remembered, was Marcus Harding himself. He wasn't what she'd expected. After months of fighting an enemy who seemed larger than life, seeing him in person was almost anticlimactic. He was just a man, maybe 60 years old, well-dressed but not ostentatious, with the kind of face that probably smiled easily at parties and never revealed what he was really thinking. He looked up as Clara approached, and their eyes met. Neither of them looked away. "Mrs. Calder," Harding said, his voice smooth and pleasant, "I was hoping we might speak before this circus begins. We have nothing to say to each other." "I think we do. I think we could still settle this quietly, avoid the spectacle of a trial. I'm prepared to offer very generous terms, more than fair market value for your ranch, guaranteed employment for your husband and his men, letters of recommendation, even a public statement saying our dispute was a simple misunderstanding." He stood, moving closer. "You could walk away from this with your dignity intact, your future secure. All you have to do is stop fighting." Clara studied his face, looking for signs of the monster she'd built him up to be in her mind. But all she saw was a businessman making a calculated offer, trying to close a deal that had become too expensive to maintain. He wasn't evil, he was practical, which somehow made it worse. "You killed a man," Clara said quietly. "The territorial investigator. You had him murdered to protect yourself." Harding's expression didn't change. "I did no such thing. That was a tragic accident, thoroughly investigated by local authorities. Authorities you control." "I control nothing. I simply conduct business in a competitive environment, same as everyone else." Harding's voice remained pleasant, reasonable. "You've built me into some kind of villain in your mind, Mrs. Calder, but I'm just a rancher who's been successful through hard work and smart decisions. If others couldn't compete, that's unfortunate, but not my responsibility. You burned our barn, killed our horses. Another tragic accident. I understand you were unable to prove otherwise." Harding tilted his head slightly. "You see the problem here? You have theories and accusations, but no proof. No witnesses willing to testify to anything criminal, just a pattern that could equally be explained by your own failures and my success." He lowered his voice. "Take the settlement, Mrs. Calder. Walk away while you still can. Because if we go to trial, I will destroy every shred of credibility you have. Your past, your family's statements about your instability, your husband's financial difficulties, it will all come out. And when I'm done, no one will believe a word you say." Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. Not fear exactly, more like clarity. This was who Harding actually was. Not a monster, but something potentially more dangerous, a man so convinced of his own righteousness that he could justify anything. Burning a barn wasn't wrong, it was business. Killing a man wasn't murder, it was removing an obstacle. Destroying someone's credibility wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. "No," Clara said. "No? No settlement. No walking away. We go to trial, and we let a jury decide who's telling the truth." Clara took a step closer to him. "And when they hear from all the ranchers you've crushed, all the families you've destroyed, all the lives you've ruined in the name of business, we'll see if they think you're just a successful rancher or something else entirely." Harding's pleasant expression finally cracked, showing something colder underneath. "You're making a mistake. I've made plenty of those. This isn't one of them. Webb appeared at Clara's elbow. We need to go in. Trial's starting. Clara turned away from Harding without another word. Behind her, she heard him say quietly, I tried to give you a way out, Mrs. Calder. Remember that. She didn't look back. The courtroom was packed. Ranchers who'd lost their land, journalists covering the trial, locals curious about the drama. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table beside Rhett and Webb, acutely aware of being watched, judged, measured. Across the aisle, Harding sat with his team of 3 lawyers, looking confident and unworried. The judge was a severe woman named Morrison, maybe 50 years old, with sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. She gavelled the court to order, and the trial began. Harding's lawyers opened with a speech about successful entrepreneurs being targeted by jealous competitors, about baseless accusations designed to tear down those who'd achieved greatness through honest work. They painted Harding as a victim of a conspiracy, Clara and Rhett as bitter failures looking for someone to blame. Webb's opening was simpler. Over the next week, you're going to hear from 20 ranchers who've lost everything to the defendant's systematic campaign of intimidation and fraud. You'll see documentation of a pattern spanning 15 years. And you'll hear from Clara Calder, a woman who had the courage to stand up when everyone else was too afraid. By the end of this trial, the only question you'll have is why it took so long for someone to stop Marcus Harding. The first week was brutal. Harding's lawyers attacked every witness, questioned every document, cast doubt on every claim. They brought up Clara's family, her father's statements about her instability, her mother's testimony that Clara had always been prone to dramatic accusations. They suggested she'd manipulated Rhett, a simple rancher who'd been content before she arrived and started causing trouble. Clara sat through it all, forcing herself to remain calm, to not react, to let the accusations wash over her without taking root. But at night, alone in the hotel room, she felt the weight of it crushing down. They were taking her whole life, every choice she'd made, every moment of strength, and twisting it into evidence of mental instability and malicious intent. They're going to win, she told Rhett on the 4th night of the trial. They're going to make me look so unreliable that nothing I say matters. Let them try. Rhett's voice was steady. Tomorrow, you testify, and when you do, you tell the truth, all of it. Let the jury decide if you're crazy or if you're the only one who had the courage to speak up. Clara testified on the 5th day. Webb led her through her story, leaving home, coming to the ranch, building a life, discovering Harding's pattern, fighting back. She spoke clearly, without drama, just laying out facts and letting them stand on their own. Then Harding's lead lawyer stood for cross-examination. His name was Pritchard, and he was everything Clara had learned to hate about the legal system. Slick, clever, more interested in winning than truth. Mrs. Calder, isn't it true that you left your family home under contentious circumstances? I left because I was unwanted there. Or because you were, as your mother testified, prone to delusions and dramatic behavior? My mother called me difficult because I asked questions and had opinions. That's not the same as being delusional. Your father stated under oath that you've always had trouble distinguishing between reality and your own interpretations of events. Would you say that's accurate? Clara felt anger rising, but pushed it down. My father said that to protect his own interests and his relationship with Mr. Harding. What he calls trouble distinguishing reality, I call seeing things clearly when everyone else was lying to themselves. Pritchard paced in front of the jury. You've accused my client of burning your barn, despite no evidence connecting him to the fire. You've accused him of murder, despite an official investigation ruling the death an accident. You've accused him of systematic fraud, despite his obvious business success. Don't these accusations sound like the work of someone who, as your family suggests, struggles with reality? No, Clara said firmly. They sound like the work of someone who finally stopped accepting lies just because they were convenient for powerful people. The courtroom murmured. Judge Morrison gavelled for silence. Pritchard changed tactics. You married Mr. Calder after knowing him for only a few months. Some might say that shows poor judgment. Some might say it shows I knew what I wanted and had the courage to choose it. Or that you manipulated a lonely man into giving you access to his property and resources? Clara felt Rhett tense beside her, but she kept her voice level. I didn't manipulate anyone. Rhett offered me a partnership and I accepted it. We've built something together that's worth fighting for. That's not manipulation, that's mutual respect. The cross-examination went on for 3 hours. Pritchard questioned every decision Clara had made, every choice, every moment of strength, trying to reframe it all as evidence of instability or malice. But with each attack, Clara felt herself getting clearer, more certain. These weren't the questions of someone seeking truth, they were the desperate strikes of someone trying to win at any cost. When Pritchard finally finished, looking satisfied that he'd dismantled her credibility, Webb stood for redirect examination. Mrs. Calder, in your own words, why did you fight back against Marcus Harding? Clara took a breath. Because I was tired of powerful people taking things from those who couldn't fight back. Because I'd spent my whole life being told to be smaller, quieter, more acceptable, and I was done. Because the ranch was my home and the people there were my family, and you don't abandon family when things get hard. She looked directly at the jury, and because someone had to. Someone had to stand up and say that what Harding was doing was wrong, even if everyone else was too afraid or too bought to say it. So I did. The trial continued for another week. More ranchers testified, their stories remarkably similar. Harding approaching with friendly offers, then turning hostile when refused, then mysterious problems arising until the ranchers had no choice but to sell at devastating losses. The pattern was undeniable. But Harding's lawyers had their own witnesses. Business associates who praised his ethics, local officials who called the accusations baseless, even some of the displaced ranchers who'd signed confidentiality agreements, and now testified that their sales had been voluntary and fairly priced. On the final day of testimony, Webb called Rhett to the stand. Clara watched her husband, normally so quiet and reserved, speak with quiet intensity about building a life on the mountain, about the barn fire that nearly destroyed them, about refusing to quit because quitting would mean letting someone like Harding win. Why didn't you just take his offer? Pritchard asked on cross-examination. Fair market value, guaranteed employment, many would consider that generous. Because it wasn't about money, Rhett said simply. It was about principle. You don't reward bullies by giving them what they want. You stand your ground and make them work for every inch. That's what my father taught me, and that's what I'm doing. Closing arguments came on a gray afternoon with rain threatening. Pritchard spoke for an hour about the sanctity of free enterprise, about jealous competitors trying to tear down success, about the dangerous precedent of allowing baseless accusations to destroy a man's reputation. Webb spoke for half that time. This case isn't complicated. Marcus Harding used his wealth and influence to systematically acquire land through intimidation, fraud, and possibly murder. 23 families have lost their livelihoods to his greed, and when Clara Calder had the courage to stand up and fight back, he tried to destroy her the same way he's destroyed everyone else. The only question before you is simple. Do we live in a society where power and money allow someone to take whatever they want? Or do we live in a society where courage and truth still matter? Your verdict will answer that question. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Clara spent that time in a fog of anxiety, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to do anything but wait. She walked the streets of Cheyenne, trying to process everything that had happened, everything she'd said, everything that had been said about her. On the 3rd day, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was even more packed than before. Clara sat between Rhett and Webb, her hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, Harding looked calm, confident. Why wouldn't he be? He'd never lost before. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. The foreman stood, a weathered man who looked like he'd spent his life working the land. In the case of Webb versus Harding, on the charge of conspiracy to defraud, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison gavelled for order, but Clara barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. Guilty. They'd found him guilty. The foreman continued reading verdicts on the various charges. Guilty of intimidation, guilty of fraudulent business practices, guilty of violating water rights laws, not guilty on the murder charge. Not enough evidence to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. But on everything else, guilty. Harding's face had gone white. His lawyers were already moving, calling for appeals, for mistrials, for anything that might change the outcome. But the verdict stood. Judge Morrison addressed the defendant. Mr. Harding, you are ordered to pay restitution to all affected ranchers at full market value as of the time of acquisition. Your current water rights claims are invalidated. You are prohibited from filing new claims in this territory for a period of 10 years. You will pay all court costs and legal fees for the plaintiffs. Do you understand? Harding stood slowly. For the first time since Clara had met him, he looked old. Yes, Your Honor. Then this court is adjourned. The gavel fell and it was over. Clara sat frozen as people rushed to congratulate them, as journalists shouted questions, as other ranchers who'd lost their land wept with relief. Webb was shaking Rhett's hand, talking about the restitution process, about next steps. But Clara couldn't move. She just stared at the empty jury box, trying to comprehend that they'd actually won. Clara, Rhett's voice, quiet beside her. We can go now. She looked at him. This man who'd given her a choice when no one else would, who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd become her partner in the truest sense. We won. You won. This was your fight, your strategy, your courage. I just backed you up. We won together. Clara stood on unsteady legs. Can we go home now? Yeah, let's go home. They left Cheyenne the next morning, riding through country that looked the same as when they'd arrived, but felt fundamentally different. The threat that had hung over them for months was gone. Not erased, Harding could still appeal, could still cause trouble, but broken. The man who'd seemed invincible had been proven fallible. The system that seemed rigged had, for once, worked the way it was supposed to. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun set behind the peaks, and Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion she couldn't quite name. Not relief exactly, not triumph, something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Of having found the place she belonged, the life she was meant to live, the person she was meant to become. Dutch and the crew met them at the barn, their faces carefully neutral until Rhett gave them a nod and a smile. Then the whooping started. Sam picking Clara up in a hug that lifted her off her feet, Tom and young Jack practically dancing, even Mrs. Gable emerging from the house with something that might have been a smile softening her stern face. You actually did it, Dutch said, shaking his head in wonder. You actually beat Marcus Harding. We did it, Clara corrected. Every single one of us. This place wouldn't exist without all of you. That night they had a celebration. Nothing fancy, just the crew gathered around the table with Mrs. Gable's best stew and Dutch's whiskey, and the simple joy of having survived something that should have destroyed them. Stories were told, laughter came easier than it had in months, and for a few hours they let themselves forget about work and worry and just exist in the moment. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, Clara stood on the porch looking at the mountains. Rhett joined her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, and they stood in comfortable silence. What are you thinking about? He asked eventually. Everything. Nothing. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. I keep waiting to feel different now that it's over. Like there should be some moment of transformation where suddenly everything makes sense. Does it not make sense? It makes perfect sense. That's what's strange. A year ago, I was someone completely different, lost, angry, desperate to escape. Now I'm this. And it doesn't feel like I became someone new. It feels like I finally became who I was supposed to be all along. Rhett nodded slowly. You know what I think? I think we're all who we're supposed to be underneath. We just need the right circumstances to show it. You weren't hiding your real self back in your family's house. You were surviving conditions that didn't allow you to be yourself. Coming here didn't change you. It freed you. Clara considered this. You think it's that simple? I think most important things are simple. Not easy, but simple. Rhett looked at the mountains. You wanted to live on your own terms, doing work that mattered, with people who respected you. That's what you've got now. The circumstances changed, not who you are. They stood in silence for a while longer. Then Clara said, Thank you. For what? For seeing me when no one else did. For giving me a choice when you could have just decided for me. For standing beside me instead of trying to lead or control or change me. She looked at him directly. For being exactly the partner I needed. Same to you, Rhett said quietly. I was half dead before you showed up, just going through motions, existing but not really living. You reminded me what it feels like to fight for something, to believe something could get better if you worked hard enough. He raised his coffee cup. To partnerships. To partnerships, Clara echoed. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But they were good years, full of the kind of hard work that builds calluses and character in equal measure. The ranch prospered as they implemented Clara's ideas about water management and grazing rotation. The crew grew to include new hands, young men drawn by the reputation of a place where hard work was valued over politics or connections. Clara became someone people in the territory came to for advice about legal matters, about standing up to powerful interests, about building something that lasted. She never advertised herself that way, but word spread. The woman who'd beaten Marcus Harding became a kind of folk hero, and while Clara found that vaguely embarrassing, she used the platform when it mattered. She helped other ranchers organize against unfair practices. She testified before territorial committees about water rights and land use. She made noise when injustice needed someone to call it out. And slowly, painfully, some of her family reached out. Not her mother. Catherine never forgave Clara for the embarrassment of the trial. But Rosalind wrote occasionally, letters that suggested she'd grown tired of the shallow society life and was considering something different. Clara wrote back, honest but not cruel, leaving the door open if her sister ever wanted to walk through it. Her father she never heard from again. She thought about him sometimes, wondered if he'd managed to rebuild his life, if he'd learned anything from losing everything. But she didn't seek him out. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. The most unexpected visitor came 5 years after the trial. Clara was working in the vegetable garden. She'd expanded it significantly, now growing enough to sell surplus in town, when Mrs. Gable called that someone was at the door. Clara wiped her hands and went to find Marcus Harding standing on her porch. He'd aged badly in 5 years. The confidence that had defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked like weariness. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "Mrs. Calder, I'm sorry to come unannounced." Clara studied him, looking for signs of threat or manipulation. But all she saw was a tired old man who looked like he'd lost something essential. "What do you want?" "To apologize. I know it's too late. I know it doesn't change anything, but I wanted to say it to your face." Harding's voice was rough. "You were right about me. Everything you said in that courtroom, it was true. I convinced myself that business was just business, that if people couldn't compete, it wasn't my fault. But it was. I ruined lives because I wanted to build an empire, and I'm sorry." Clara considered not accepting this, sending him away with the same coldness he'd shown his victims. But standing there looking at this broken man, she realized something. He'd already lost everything that mattered to him. His reputation, his power, his ability to control and manipulate. Making him feel worse wouldn't give her anything she didn't already have. "I accept your apology," she said, "not because I forgive you. That's not mine to give. The people you hurt, the families you destroyed, they're the ones who'd need to forgive you. But I accept that you're sorry, and I hope you spend whatever time you have left trying to make amends." Harding nodded, looking like he might cry. "Thank you." He turned to go, then paused. "You know what I hated most about losing to you? It wasn't the money or the reputation. It was that you were right. You said I was afraid of people like you, people who wouldn't be intimidated or bought. And I was. Because deep down I knew that if enough people had your courage, men like me would have no power at all." He put his hat back on. "The world needs more people like you, Mrs. Calder. It surely does." He walked away and Clara watched him go with mixed feelings. Not satisfaction exactly. There was no pleasure in seeing someone so diminished. But closure, maybe. A final confirmation that the fight had been worth it, that standing up had mattered. Children came, eventually, 3 of them over the following years. A daughter who inherited Clara's stubbornness and Rhett's quiet intensity. Twin boys who kept everyone on their toes with their energy and endless questions. Clara raised them to speak their minds, to work hard, to understand that being difficult often just meant being right when everyone else wanted easy lives. And she told them stories about choices and courage, about leaving places that made you small and building lives that let you grow. She told them about barns that burned and ranches that survived, about powerful people who seemed invincible until someone had the courage to stand up. But mostly she showed them through living it, through working beside her crew well into her 60s, hands still calloused and strong, through fighting for what was right even when it was inconvenient or unpopular, through building a life based on partnership and mutual respect rather than dominance and control. On a clear autumn day, decades after she'd first arrived at the ranch, Clara stood on the same ridge where she'd first seen the valley spread below. Her hair was gray now, her face lined with years of sun and wind, but her eyes were still sharp, still saw things clearly. Rhett stood beside her, slower but still solid, still the quiet presence who'd given her space to become herself. Behind them, the ranch spread across the valley. Buildings they'd built or rebuilt, land they'd defended, a life they'd created together. "You ever regret it?" Rhett asked. "Leaving everything behind, coming up here?" Clara thought about the question seriously, running through decades of memories. The hard times, and there had been many. The losses and setbacks and moments when quitting seemed easier than continuing. The price paid in comfort and security and the approval of people who'd never understood her anyway. But also the victories. The barn they'd rebuilt in winter. The trial they'd won against impossible odds. The family they'd raised to be strong and honest and unafraid. The life they'd built on their own terms, answerable to no one but themselves and each other. "Not once," she said. "Not even for a moment." "Good," Rhett said. "Because I don't either." They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains. Two people who'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other, who'd built something real from nothing but work and will and the stubborn refusal to be small. And in that moment, Clara understood the truth she'd been learning slowly over all these years. She hadn't been the problem. The world that wanted her silent and small and compliant, that was the problem. Walking away from it wasn't running away. It was running toward the life she was meant to live. Some people called her difficult to the end. She wore the label proudly, because difficult people change things. Difficult people stood up when everyone else sat down. Difficult people built ranches on mountains and won trials against powerful men and raised children who knew their worth. Difficult people refused to disappear just because their presence made others uncomfortable. And Clara Vance Calder, that difficult, stubborn, impossible woman, had lived a life that proved one thing beyond doubt. The greatest victory wasn't being accepted by those who wanted you small. It was finding the courage to choose yourself completely, build something worth defending, and become so strong in your own truth that their approval stopped mattering at all. She hadn't won by proving them wrong about her. She'd won by proving herself right. And that made all the difference.